IB Nation, what's going on? Welcome to the Irish Breakdown Podcast, coming to you live on a Thursday. Beautiful, wonderful Thursday, except it's extremely cloudy here in the state of New Jersey. But we are living.
Not in Indiana, baby. The sun is shining here
is
in
it sunny
Indiana,
out there?
baby. So the sun is shining on the Golden Dome today, my friend. So that is a perfect time for us to have this conversation.
Yeah, man. And this one, so Ryan Roberts, Brian Driscoll, of course. Make sure to go check out irishbreakdown.com if you haven't. If this is your first time joining us here on the YouTube channel, like, subscribe, all that great stuff. Brian, I know yesterday, I want to tell everyone actually a great story, right? A great story. Once upon a time, there was a great podcast that was yesterday's show, where there was a section of this podcast where people asked us for a hot take. And one hot take that Brian kind of talked about a little bit was that he legitimately thinks that Notre Dame is a championship caliber football team in the year 2023.
I thought you started that conversation.
Oh, I said that there's a landslide that could happen if they do win a championship.
Gotcha.
In 2023.
Okay.
But
which then led to me saying
yes. All these conversations work off of one another, which is awesome. Right. And the reason we want to do this podcast today is because me and Brian agree on one simple thing here, right? Is that we believe that Notre Dame has an opportunity to compete for a national championship this upcoming season. So we wanted to break this thing down for you a little bit and talk about Notre Dame's chances, because the cool thing is that there's going to be kind of an overarching conversation here. We're going to be able to talk about the state of college football, what some other teams have bringing back, what are the strengths, weaknesses. So it's kind of more of a college football topic, but we're going to take this into a micro level of Notre Dame and what they have in the ability to compete for a national championship. So we kind of broke this up into position groups, and we have kind of put this into three categories. One is right now, definitively, we are confident that Notre Dame can compete for a national championship based upon this particular position group, offensively and defensively.
That group can be the fuel to a title. Right.
Second group is that we have high expectations for a group, but it's a little bit more of an unknown. There is some work to be done. There is some worth to be proven going into 2023 season. And then the third category is obviously we're just not sure, right? There's still work that needs to be done in order to get this to be the driving force to a national championship. So, Brian, I know this is going to be a fun conversation, man, because there's a lot of variables that go into being a national championship. We're also going to talk about the importance of certain positions, right? Because I think that there's a position hierarchy as far as the value of what really drives national championships. So let's start on the offensive side of the football, though, because I think that,
I want to just talk a little bit big picture about it, though, Ryan, about what makes this unique. Because I think a lot of people are going to say, they're going to look at history and say, well, look what Bama's done and look what Georgia's done, and Notre Dame can't compete with that. And the point is this, Ryan, it's like, but it doesn't matter, right? What matters is this season. And a perfect example is this. Notre Dame's 2018 team, if it would have been the 2017 season, could have won a title. No question. Could have won a title. They had no chance at winning a title in 2018 because they just could not stack up against that outstanding Clemson team. And they couldn't have won a title in 2019 because the best Notre Dame team, I've said this, the 15 team and the 18 team and the 17 team with a better quarterback better quarterback play, could have contended for a title in a lot of years. None of those teams, none of them could have won a title in 2019. There's no way they're beating LSU. No way. Right.
And most teams historically would have not have beaten that 2019 team, to your point. Yeah.
And that 2018 Clemson team was pretty flipping good as well. Right. But you put that team in 2020 and you take the 2018 Notre Dame team against the 2020 Bama team, and it's a more competitive game. They'd have a shot. You put them against the 16 Bama team and they've got a shot. You put them against the 17 Bama team and they have a shot. The 2017 Notre Dame team was at best, the third best team that Notre Dame had in the last 10 years. And they took Georgia down to the wire and didn't even play well early in the season against them, right? And so a lot of it depends on what year are you competing for this championship, right? Like, what is happening around the country? We've talked about there being some down years. 2021 was a bit of a down year nationally. 2020 was a bit of a down year because of the COVID stuff and just the craziness that all that was. Last year, there were some pretty strong teams in college football last year, right? Not as good as 2018 and 2019, but there were some pretty good teams that year. Where we're looking at this is when you look at 2023, this is a unique season where you have to be cognizant. If you're Notre Dame, you say, well, we're going to build to winning a championship, so we should think towards 2024. No, maybe your team might even be better in 2024. That's debatable, but you've got to look at college football as a whole as well and make your run now. That's what factors into, do we go after Sam Hartman or we just develop Tyler Buchner? Right? Well, that might have been better for 2024 to not take Sam Hartman and develop Tyler Buchner. But when you look around college football, you say, boy, we got a shot to make a run with a better quarterback play. And Tyler still is a giant unknown. Talented. Everybody knows what I think about his upside, but that's a big gamble to say we're going to ride that into this season. Because even his tremendous performance against South Carolina still included 3 interceptions. So I think when you look around college football, you see, look, Georgia has lost 25 players to the draft in the last 2 years. 25. They just had another key player take a payout to go to USC. They're going to still be very good. Don't get me wrong, but are they going to be the Georgia of the last 2 years? I don't think so. Are they a title contender? Of course. You're the champ till somebody beats you, Ryan. That's my stance, right? Bama's still going to have a very talented team, but they've got major question marks at quarterback. The guy that we were saying Notre Dame can't gamble on is now who Alabama's gambling on to win them this year. But there's some other question marks. The receiving core isn't what it used to be. Their running back group is young, talented, but young. Their offensive line should be pretty good. There's some question marks other places. Very good team, title contender, no question, but not a typical Bama team that's been a title team. Ohio State lost some very good football players from their team. Major question marks in the offensive line. They just took a grad transfer from San Diego State to play left tackle for them, right? I mean,
and guys, I don't want to break news here. That the Simmons kid from San Diego State that they took was not their first option of offensive tackles in the portal. I just want to put it out there. Like, that was not their guy in the portal. Just want to put that out.
They just lost a quarterback who's number 2 overall pick. Now, is Ohio State going to be talented? Of course they are. Are they going to be easy to beat this year? Of course not. The point is, are they a typical Ohio State team? When you think, boy, that team's just got everything. No quarterback. Clemson obviously is not what they used to be, even though I think they've made some moves that are going to help them kind of get back on maybe a little bit better trajectory. We'll talk about that. Moral of the story is, you look around college football, USC's the only team that of the teams that are title contenders, there's really only 2, in my opinion. Well, 3. I got to give Michigan. They've made the playoff 2 years in a row. I got to include Michigan in there. Only 3 of the 7 or 8 have a returning quarterback. I don't view Texas as a title contender yet. I mean, I know that they're getting a lot of hype, but they're coming off an 8-5 year. I just need to see it with Texas first. They have talent, but I need to see it. USC has a big-time quarterback coming back, but their defense is a hot mess. Their offensive line's a major question mark. You look at, obviously Michigan comes back. They lost some big-time players as well, right? They're a very good team, but they're not a flawless team. There have been better Michigan teams in past years. And then the third is LSU, who I think could be a title contender this year. We'll see. Again, I have questions about their coaching, but their roster is pretty good, Ryan. They're a top 10 team. And if you're in the top 10, you're a title contender, in my opinion. So there aren't a lot of quarterbacks coming back, and now Notre Dame has a chance to go out there and take advantage of that, in my opinion. They return 8 starters on defense. They return arguably the best tackle tandem in college football, veteran quarterback, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's the potential for them to make that run because of what's out there this year. This is one of those years you have to take advantage of 2 things. Number 1, nationally, teams are just not going to be on the level they have been in recent years. And number 2, those teams, especially the ones on your schedule, don't have the returning quarterbacks, or you get them at home in the case of USC and Ohio State. So I think it's why we look at it and say, boy, this is the thing where you look at the combination of what Notre Dame has coming back combined with what other teams have coming back. This is a team that has a chance. Now, some things have got to get fixed and fall into place, and they're going to need some breaks to go their way. We're not going to ignore that, but there's enough there to where if a couple things happen, this team has a chance to make that kind of run, and they're better positioned now than they were in 2018 or 2015 when you look around the landscape of college football, in my opinion.
So you're telling me there's a chance. I mean, look, man, I think that the optimism starts on the offensive side of the ball, which is kind of a unique situation, isn't it, a little bit, Brian? The fact that, I mean, usually it's like the Notre Dame defense is the one that like you're like sure about. Like, that's going to be a really good unit. Offensively, you need to get the offensive firepower working a little bit. I mean, you look at this offense for Notre Dame in 2023, that has me juiced, man. Like just about every position we look at and we say like that team, that spot, if things roll the right way, can compete for a national championship and could be a potential driving force. And I think it starts at the quarterback position, right?
Well,
for the
first backfield
time,
in general, but yes, it has to start at the quarterback position.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, because if we're overlaying, and of course we did in this conversation, put running back and quarterback into the same conversation. My thing, though, is that I think that most people would agree coming into this season that running back was going to be an absolute strength, right? And that was without a transfer even in the conversation. You're like, yes, Audric Estime is a dude. We know how Notre Dame's been recruiting. We know that there's going to be just a litter of talent at running back. But now with Sam Hartman coming in to add to that backfield for the first time in a long time, and we just talked about this before the show started, a little like pre-game of just talking about, what we're, in depth about what we're going to speak about today. When is the last time, and you asked me this question, Brian, and I think it's a great question to kind of spark this conversation is, when is the last time that Notre Dame had a more proven and productive option at quarterback coming back than Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, anywhere,
Clemson,
almost just about outside of like USC? Oklahoma, I mean, you can make that conversation.
Well, statistically, there isn't a better quarterback coming back in college football. Now, again, that's misleading. I mean, that if we're going to go there, it's spin, because two things. Number one is he's played longer, number one. And number two, he didn't do any of that for Notre Dame. He did it all at Wake Forest. So, right. But the point is we've seen him do it against Clemson, and we've seen him do it in bowl games. We've seen him do it in a Power 5 conference, and we've seen the good and we've seen the bad. We know his warts and we know his strengths. And so to me, when you look at it and say the reason that I want to put backfield together, Ryan, and I know that we're on the same page on this, is because it's important to stress that at Wake Forest, Sam Hartman kind of had to do it all by himself. I mean, that's the reality of it. You and I both loved A.T. Perry as a football player. I absolutely love A.T. Perry. He was a 6th-round draft pick.
Yeah. Medicals hurt him a little bit down the stretch, apparently. But yeah. Yep.
But he's a 6th-round draft pick, right? And so you're talking about a guy that made people around him better. And the reason that I like to go with the backfield together, number one, is because they work together. But number two, because this is the most support Sam Hartman's ever really going to have had. I mean, they had Kenny Walker at Wake Forest a couple of years ago, but they didn't use him. I mean, he wasn't even their leading ball carrier, I don't believe, in his last 2 seasons there, right? I mean, Christian Beal-Smith.
You know what's funny is someone told me, it was one of my buddies, Alex, who does a lot of NFL draft stuff. He was like, dude, I really like this Kenneth Walker kid that's transferred from Wake Forest to Michigan State. I think he could be a riser this year. I'm like, yeah, all right, man, we'll see. And that was a good call on his part.
Wake Forest had Cade Carney getting more carries than him in 2019. And then they had Christian Beal-Smith getting more carries than him in 2018 or 2020, excuse me.
I forgot about Cade Carney, man. What a throwback.
Yeah, so he transfers to Pitt, has a great year. The point being that he's never going to – he hasn't had a feature back like Audric Estime. And then the depth at running back. And then you look at the wide receivers are going to be on par talent-wise, if not better, than what he had at Wake Forest. And then, of course, the offensive line. But the backfield part is together. And I think that's the important thing is you've got, to me, one of the 10 best quarterbacks and one of the 10 best running backs in college football returning to your roster for this season. And it's been a long time since we could say that about Notre Dame. I mean, in 2018, Ian Book was a nice player. He was a good veteran, tough kid, did what he needed to do to make sure that they won a lot of games and all that. But you put him on the stage, what was Ian Book? Even if Ian Book was everything that some Notre Dame fans say he was, right? We all agree that when he got into the college football playoff, it was him, Kyler Murray, Trevor Lawrence, and Tua Tagovailoa. They're not on that level. this season you feel better about the chance of him being there. Because let's say the typical teams make it, right? It's Ohio State. Well, Notre Dame has a chance to knock Ohio State out by themselves, right? Let's say Michigan or Penn State are the representatives of the Big Ten. And let's say you get your Notre Dame can knock out the Pac-12 champ, USC. Let's just go there. And they knock out Clemson, the ACC champ, right? Just for argument's sake. And then you get your two typical SEC powers. So now we're talking about Notre Dame going to the college football playoff, and the 4 quarterbacks are J.J. McCarthy, Tyler Buchner, or Ty Simpson, and Carson Beck. Now, Carson Beck's a nice player, but he's not Tua Tagovailoa. He's not Kyler Murray. He's not Trevor Lawrence, right? He's not Joe Burrow. He's not Justin Fields. He's not those guys that we've seen in the playoff in the past seasons. Mac Jones. I mean, the list goes on. And that's what it comes down to. So now it's like we don't have the most important position in the game. We're not having to say, boy, we're having to find a lot of other things to overcome the fact that we're not nearly as good as those teams there. And that's the reality, because you have a chance to knock out one of the best quarterbacks in college football. You have a chance to knock them out of the playoff in the regular season at your place, in your stadium, with a week to prepare, not a whole month where they can design a million schemes and all that, at your place, right? Drew Aller's a talented quarterback, but he's far from he's work in progress. He's a still guy that still needs some work. I actually thought, I had a buddy who was like, I didn't think he played well in the spring game. I thought he played pretty well in their spring game. Made good decisions. He's always going to be a bit of an inaccurate guy. He's never going to be a 70% completion guy.
Yeah.
But he's a guy that can go make some plays. And I thought he did that. But, is he a guy that you're saying right now, you're saying, oh, yeah, that guy's going to put a team on his shoulders and lead you to a title? And right now you look at it and say, Notre Dame has a guy capable of it. Now, can he do it at Notre Dame? We'll find out. It's a bit of an unknown. But I have a hard time seeing this kid do what he's done at Wake Forest. And then he's played in some he's played at Clemson. He's played at Florida State and won, actually. He's never lost to Florida State, actually, as a starting quarterback.
That's a wild stat, man.
Yeah,
how many quarterbacks can say that? How many quarterbacks can say that? That's crazy. Well, Brian, what do we talk about in the recruiting circles so often around here? It's gap closers, right? And one position that there's been a gap at for several years between Notre Dame and the other powers in college football has been the quarterback position. I mean, you just mentioned a few of them, right? Like Justin Fields, Tua Tagovailoa, C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young. There has been gaps as far as
Jones,
the quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Yes. There's
Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield. Yes, exactly.
There's been that difference. There's been that difference.
But here's the thing. What's the one powerhouse program that didn't have a gap at quarterback? It's Georgia.
Georgia, yeah.
And what happened the 2 times Notre Dame played Georgia?
It was a competitive game. Yeah.
Notre Dame had the ball Notre Dame had the ball late in the fourth quarter in both games with a chance to win with a touchdown. Both games. They had a second half lead in both games, at Georgia and at Notre Dame, because Georgia then it came down to, okay, you've got to beat us in the trenches for 60 minutes. And they were able to neutralize Notre Dame, but then Notre Dame was also able to neutralize Georgia in ways that people don't talk about in those 2 games. They weren't able to run the ball. They had one long run in 17 on a jet sweep to DeAndre Swift. They didn't run the ball great in those other 2 games, but they didn't have a quarterback that could just bury you. Now, Jake Fromm made some money plays late in both of those games. But the point is, he couldn't put this offense on his shoulders and just dominate you the way that Trevor was able to do to Notre Dame. One mistake by Notre Dame in the 2018 playoff game, and Trevor exposed it for big plays. All right, Notre Dame probably made 5 defensive mistakes that game, and on 4 of those plays, they got 50 yards or more. I mean, I'm serious. Go break down the film. That's exactly what happened. It was absolutely wild, but you don't have a lot of quarterbacks that have proven with that ability. Notre Dame has a guy that you think can be that kind of guy. Now, he's got to limit some of the turnovers and all that, but again, it goes down to he doesn't have to do it all by himself like he's had to.
I mean, and again, man, like it's just Notre Dame hasn't just closed the gap with getting Sam Hartman against the other teams for just the 2023 season. I'm not talking about long-term. I'm talking about multiple seasons. I'm not talking about the next 5, next 10. I'm not talking about any overarching long-term implications here. I'm talking for 2023. Right now, Notre Dame in a vacuum over some of the top teams in college football, they have the gap, right? They have the gap right now because they have the proven commodity. Could Carson Beck be really good? It's possible. Could Kyle McCord end up being a dude? It's also possible. But as of right now, Sam Hartman is the known commodity coming back.
So you look at the Notre Dame backfield, you're talking about a guy coming back that had 900 yards last year, averaged 5.9 yards per carry, 11 touchdowns as guys splitting reps. got a talented backfield coming up behind him. There's questions what we talked about with health, which we've mentioned, but there's a lot of talent there. So backfield wise, you look at Notre Dame, and I would argue that they have a top 5 backfield in college football right now. Now, you could argue that Ohio State has a better running back room. You could argue that Penn State has a better running back room. You could argue that Michigan has a better running back room. And I would agree with you in all of those instances because there's a lot more proven commodities there. But what they don't have is a better quarterback than what Notre Dame has. And that's why Notre Dame is in that conversation with them. And I think that's a great place to start. The next place, Ryan, is obviously offensive line. Look,
I feel a little bit naughty not starting with the offensive line for a Notre Dame.
Well, it's just because it's so different. Like we're just almost like, it's assuming that, right, to a degree. Now, look, the thing is with all these positions, every team in the country every team has a guard they're trying to replace, or a tackle they're trying to replace, or this guy they're trying to replace. But that's just part of college football. But you're talking about a team that returns arguably the best tackle tandem in college football, a veteran center who just got better and better and better last year. And you don't know who your guards are going to be, but all of them are talented guys that bring ability to the table. And you also have a schedule that's set up nicely early in the season to where your offensive line doesn't have to face the gauntlet out of the stretch like it did a year ago, where, Marshall was a very good defensive football team last year. They were experienced. They had a bunch of older players. They were able to just outplay Notre Dame, even though they couldn't out-talent Notre Dame. And Ohio State clearly was able to do both against Notre Dame last year. So you're breaking in. Last year, you had 2 true sophomores at offensive tackle. Blake Fisher had 2 career starts under his belt. Joe Smith-Schaalt had only been a half-year starter. Zeke Correll had only started 2 games in his career at center. And then Jarrett Patterson doesn't play against Ohio State. You're a mess. Your most experienced offensive lineman going to the Ohio State game last year was Andrew Kostovic, who now you're not even sure is going to start. Oh, it's actually Andrew Kostovic and Josh Lugg. And, no one's arguing those are their 2 best offensive linemen. Well, that's a different story now. Both Blake and Joe Alt have a full year of starting experience under their belt. Zeke Correll's now a veteran experienced player. And so now it's just, okay, what are you going to figure out at guard? So the expectation is that this Notre Dame offensive line is going to be really good. It's going to be a top 10 caliber offensive line. And if the thing is, you don't have to necessarily be top 5 everywhere to be a title contender. You just have to be good everywhere and then have a couple positions where you're really, really good. So backfield, I think they're top 5. Offensive line, even just right now being conservative, it's a top 10 offensive line with a chance, if the guards play well, to be a top 5 offensive line. But we're going to try to be conservative, not just pie in the sky with every position group, right? We're going to try to be as objective as we possibly can. But we think that's good enough with the talent around them to be part of a championship team. If it becomes top 5, like it's capable of, and that's kind of what I'm projecting, I think it will become that. Now, all of a sudden, you're winning because of your offensive line, and that's the expectation for Joe Rudolph is to build a unit that you can say, "Hey, we're going to win because of this unit." And they could do that against Clemson. They couldn't do that last year against USC and Ohio State for different reasons. But what was the primary reason? The backfield did not do what it needed to do to win those games. The defense at times, and we'll get into those. But the offensive line, to me, Ryan, I expect to be if Notre Dame wins a title this year or competes for a title this year, there's no doubt the offensive line is going to be part of that. And whatever success they do have, the offensive line is going to be a big part of that. And so that's why absolutely this unit belongs in this conversation.
And it's hard to quantify sometimes as far as like how just dominant an offensive line is, because we talk about it's easy for a quarterback, for instance, right, Brian? It's like, look at what the stats say, right? And what he was able to do in the fourth quarter and what his completion percentage is and what his yards per attempt are. And we can quantify that a lot. It's an eye test for offensive linemen sometimes, man. It's when the game's on the line against a really good football team and your offensive line just wears dudes down in the most important sections of the game. Like that's kind of where I look at this offensive line. And I think that they can be that in 2023, because you mentioned it already. You're returning 3 starters, but those 3 starters are at the most important positions on an offensive line. We're talking about the offensive tackle, left tackle, and Joe Alt, who was an All-American last season, arguably the top offensive tackle in college football returning in 2023. You're talking about Blake Fisher, who, look, man, Blake Fisher needs to take a step up and be able to take his game to that next level. But just from a physical perspective, you could argue that he's more talented in a dominance perspective than Joel at his absolute best. You can make that conversation. And then Zeke Correll should be one of the better starting centers returning in college football in 2023. And if you could tell me you could only return 3 starters on the offensive line, I would want a left tackle, right tackle, and center. And not necessarily in order, but those 3 positions are the most important. And the great thing is if we're projecting, which is what we have to do with the other 2 guard spots because we haven't seen a big sample size, I could say here and say, look, Josh Lugg was a tough dude for Notre Dame over the last couple of years, man. Went through a lot of injuries, was a really durable player, and a guy that just he fought his butt off, man, for Notre Dame football. Jared Patterson ended up being a solid starting left guard for Notre Dame, making that transition over center. But I believe that your potential 2 starting guards in 2023 may be more physically gifted than what you had in 2022. It doesn't necessarily mean they'll be better, but that means that they may be more talented. You may have had a talent upgrade in that spot. Now, obviously, offensive line is usually dependent on experience. Like that is a big help, obviously, in the development in those in-game reps or something that is so important for offensive line. But I agree, Brian, especially when because we have to juxtapose this to other offensive lines in college football. Like that's an important part of this, especially when driving force against other teams. Because I look at it and I say, Michigan just lost their starting center and their left tackle, right? They just lost those 2 guys. And both those guys were drafted in the NFL. You're talking about a Georgia offensive line that just lost the 14th overall pick left tackle to the NFL, as well as their starting right tackle in Warren McClendon, who was drafted as well. You talk about Alabama. Alabama lost starting guard in Emil Ekiyor, starting offensive tackle in Tyler Steen. They also lost Javion Cohen to transfer this offseason, who ended up at the University of Miami. So all these teams have had attrition on the offensive line, but I think it's very important to, again, hyper-focus on where are the losses for Notre Dame. If there are 2 positions that you can afford replacing on a year-to-year basis, it's offensive guard, unless it's a Quentin Nelson, right?
Like depth's so important, Ryan.
Yes,
in college football, depth's important. I mean, last 2 years, Alabama's lost arguably their best edge rusher during the season to different reasons, and they were fine because they had other guys to step up. They lose the Anderson kid in 2021. Robert Beal steps up, right, and plays well. Nolan Smith does some things. This year, Nolan Smith goes down. Okay, other guys step up and play. Depth is important. You've got to be able to overcome that.
Williams, go out there, brother. Like
right, exactly. So those are things you look at, Ryan, and you're talking about an offense that needs to be efficient, and also explosive. And the question is, can you build that type of team? And we'll talk about skill and all that, but a big major driving force to being really efficient on offense is having a great offensive line, and that's going to be needed and something I expect. We're not going to leave the defense out of this conversation, Ryan. And I can't believe we're having this conversation. 2 years ago, if you'd have told me this, I'd have laughed at you and said, man, I got to question your football knowledge, man. I don't know about this one. If you were to say in 2 years, cornerback is going to be Notre Dame's cornerback room is going to be one of the best in college football, I'd have been like, come on, dude. Let's be serious.
I mean, dude. I mean, we're 2 seasons away from needing Nick McLeod to be a grad transfer. Needing, or else you are in trouble.
You played in the college football 2 seasons ago, Notre Dame. So it'd actually be 3 seasons ago. So it was 22, 21, 20.
Yeah. Yep.
You played in the college football playoff with Nick McLeod and Clarence Lewis as your starting corners. Right now, Nick McLeod is an undrafted free agent. He's stuck around the NFL, I believe. He's still on a practice squad, I believe, because he can run.
He's a tough kid, man.
Clarence Lewis, at best, is going to be Notre Dame's 4th corner this year, at best. And that guy was starting for you in the playoff 2 years ago. Obviously, Cam Hart being developed has been important. And obviously, the emergence of Benjamin Morrison. But as we saw this spring, Jaden Mickey had a really good spring. You've got Chance Tucker emerging for depth. And so there's some players there to the point where we're going to talk about safety way down later, right? Well, this is a position that's so strong. You can look at and say, well, what about moving some of these guys over there to help out? Because you have the depth to do so. So you're talking about a unit, Ryan, that's a little different than the 2018 unit. Because this isn't the first time Notre Dame's had a top 5 cornerback tandem, in my opinion. Right. I mean, 2018, I think Troy Pride and Julian Love were absolutely a top 5 cornerback room. But you were a little bit limited on how you could use them. Troy could play man. But Julian Love was not a man guy. I remember that year because remember he had a great year in 2020 or 2017. At 23 total passes defensed, which was a tied Notre Dame record or broken Notre Dame record.
Yeah.
He had like 3 picks and 20 breakups, and he had like 2 of his picks were pick sixes and just all those type of things, right? But
him in cover 2 was a joy to watch, man. Him in cover 2 is absolutely incredible. To your point, it was.
So Notre Dame comes out the next year thinking we got an All-American caliber corner, and they tried to have him play man coverage against Nico Collins. And what happened in the first opener? Nico smoked him for a 50-something yard gain on a post route, and they were like, "Yeah, let's go back to playing zone." The thing that's good about this unit is they can play zone. Right, Cam could be a great zone cornerback. I mean, as rangy as he is, try making a cover 2 hole throw over top of Cam Hart. Right, good luck with that. But they're also thrive in man coverage. Both of them thrive in man coverage.
Yep.
And there aren't many teams that just have 2 corners that you can just lock up and look up and say, "Hey, I don't care who we're playing. We're going to line it. You may win some, but we're going to win more." And that's a huge part of what can be a driving force to this defense getting better this season.
And that's a great, and again, I think it's comparing it to the other teams that we would view as championship contenders in 2023, as far as what they return at cornerback, right? And because I think that most teams you would look at and say they got one really good dude. Like I think of like Will Johnson for Michigan's a guy, for instance, right? It's like that guy is very talented, but they also just lost DJ Turner. So they have to replace one starting corner. So they have one really good guy coming back. I think of Georgia. They had the kid that was amazing in the national championship game, whose name's escaping me for a second. He was a former 3-star, but he was a dude. But you also have to replace Keely Ringo this offseason as the other starting corner. So there's usually some attrition, not you on these great teams. Because quarterback has become such an important position that, Georgia, Alabama seem to have a guy every single year. Alabama is the only team that I think that you look at as far as one of those top schools and say they're returning their 2 best corners from last year. They have Kool-Aid McKinstry coming back. They have Terry and Arnold. That was their best corners of last year. But I think that it's not like egregious to argue that Notre Dame's duo of Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart is in that conversation of being the best cornerback duo in college football. And that's not even counting Jaden Mickey hopefully having a little bit of a breakout. Clarence Lewis coming back. Christian Gray is a true freshman, hopefully getting some opportunities in the fall. So I think when you're talking about just that duo, Brian, for me, it's like outside of Alabama, not any like legitimate championship contender has a duo that can match the Cam Harts.
Or at least that you can say is better. At least you can say it's better.
Exactly.
Right. And I know that people talk about like Denzel Burke and I'm like, okay, fine. I get he's mock draft in the first round by everybody, but the production's not what the film doesn't
Ohio
tell
State
the same
fans
story.
Aren't that high on Denzel Burke.
No,
so,
no.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's also, it's not just talented corners. It's talented corners that can match up with size. They can match up with speed. They can play zone. They can play man. And there just aren't. That's what made that 2018 Clemson cornerback tandem so good. AJ Terrell and Trayvon Mullen, right? Is they were so long they could be really good zone guys, but they could just line up and say we're gonna cover you. And now Notre Dame's guys were able to get a little bit of separation, but they were getting like NFL separation, not college separation. And that's why you needed a big time quarterback to be able to make them pay, and they couldn't do it.
Like half a step, not
right,
multiple steps.
Right, like that post route that Miles Boykin beat. He had him beat, but it's like NFL beat. Meaning like you needed to make a good throw. It wasn't like he was 8 yards past the guy. And that's why the lack of quarterback play has hurt them. This kind of goes back to that original thing. Now you feel like they have a quarterback that can bang that post throw and it's touchdown or first and goal. But Notre Dame's got a cornerback tandem where you're going to make a play here and a play there. Ohio State beat Cam Hart twice early, once for pass interference and once on a touchdown where he tried to undercut the route, didn't get to the ball, turned it up and beat him. Didn't beat him the rest of the game, right? So you got him early, but you didn't get him again. They tried to pick on Benjamin Morrison, didn't go well. And now Ohio State fans say, well, but that was Marvin Harrison. Guys, it was Benjamin Morrison's first career game ever, right? So, yes, Marvin got better. So did Benjamin. And it's going to be a great battle, but in past years, you look at like if Notre Dame is having to play a Marvin Harrison and a Nemeka Egbuka, I don't care where they're playing, and you're trying to guard them with Nick McLeod and Clarence Lewis or some of the tandems they've had in the past, you're like, this is not going to be good. This is going to not be good. now you're talking about, we do have a 2018 caliber unit, because the 2018 corners weren't getting beat either. When Clemson beat Notre Dame in 2018 throwing the football, it wasn't against Julian Love and Troy Pride.
Right.
It was against Dante Vaughn, the safeties, positions like that, right? And you feel like you have that tandem group again. And those guys are excellent at Ohio State, but so was that Clemson tandem that we saw Notre Dame go toe-to-toe with in 2018 of T. Higgins and Justin Ross.
Yep.
So that's what you kind of get fired up about, Ryan, is in this conversation, the reason that I feel differently about this team and why I'm more optimistic about this team than past teams where you just needed everything to go right is in this conversation right here. 2019, 2020, I'd say more so 2019 especially, but 2020 even going into the season, I didn't have a lot of confidence at quarterback, and I didn't have a lot of confidence at running back.
Sure.
And didn't have a lot of confidence at corner. Now you look at it and say, what are two of your three greatest strengths? Quarterback and cornerback. Those are two of the most important positions in college football that you see Brian Smith did a breakdown on this, but he talked about teams that have like won conference championships and then in the playoffs. Most of them had really good cornerback tandems, including Notre Dame in 2018 had a really good cornerback tandem. Yep. Had one of the best secondaries in college football that year, which is why that was the Notre Dame team that we all felt belonged more than the 2020 team, right? Who just benefited from the COVID year, with all due respect to that team. I mean, they battled their butts off and they came together as a team, and it's a season those kids should all be very, very proud of. But that wasn't one of your two best Notre Dame teams. There's 3 or 4 Notre Dame teams better than that team. That team did what they needed to do. But, we even went to that Bama game saying Notre Dame's going to have everything go right and Bama to make mistakes to have a chance to win this game.
Well, I think Bama's the perfect example of what you're talking about, Brian, because I mean, the two things that I left the Alabama game and I was like, the biggest differences in that football game was Notre Dame was not on par from a quarterback perspective as far as his ability to make plays consistently, and the speed outside on the perimeter. Like, they were throwing bubble screens all day. I mean, give Mac Jones all the credit. Mac Jones was phenomenal that year, but Mac Jones was not he wasn't pressed to do a ton in that football game.
Do you know how many completions he had beyond 20 yards past line of scrimmage?
Probably
in that
one.
Game? 0.
One, maybe. 0, yeah.
The only one that traveled more than 20 yards, quote unquote 20 yards, was one that got caught in the end zone. Is that drag route to Jaleel Billingsley? Is the only one that Pro Football Focus had going over 20. He tried to throw over 20 early, and Hamilton almost picked him off.
Was that the one down the sideline that he broke up? Yeah,
Kyle almost picked him
Bolton
off
or whatever.
And they were like, "Yeah, we're not doing this again," and didn't need to. To your point, they didn't need to. This team is much better. I mean, Clemson tried to do that against Notre Dame this year, and it did not work at all. Ohio State tried to do some of that stuff this year against Notre Dame, and it didn't work. If you're going to beat Notre Dame, you better be able to beat them down the field, and
Brian, I mean, I just think it's some of the biggest plays in that Alabama game was either bubbles to Devonta Smith, or it was an outside zone to Najee Harris where he hurdled a corner, right? Like, that was like the biggest plays in that football game. I'm just
and linebackers did a terrible job scraping on that play.
Yeah.
Because if you go back and watch that play, that long run, Notre Dame's defensive line pushed Alabama's offensive line like 2 yards into the backfield.
Yeah.
But Drew White ran right into a blocker and Nick McLeod whiffed.
Yes.
And outside of that, Bama did nothing in the run game that day, because Notre Dame, at the very least, stalemated Alabama in that game on offensive line, because they got tons of pressure, just they couldn't bring Mac Jones down. Yep. They got outclassed on the perimeter in that game on both sides of the ball.
Yep.
That was the problem. Here's the other thing too, Ryan. We talk about corner play. We can't dismiss the impact that Thomas Harper can have in the nickel either. If he's healthy and plays like he did last year at Oklahoma State, he's out. He's a top 10 nickel, in my opinion, in college football if he plays like that. And you go back and look at, and you want to know an example, you want to know evidence why I believe that. Number one is film. I thought the film was excellent. Number two, go look at what that defense did the minute he went out. Literally, the minute he went out, they were blasting TCU. He got hurt. It was like 24-7. He got hurt, and that's when TCU went on their run. And their defense was never the same after that. Now, was it all on Thomas Harper getting hurt? No, there's other things, but that was a big part of it. because he was the glue that held it all together, because he was there. Then all these other guys could do all these other things. And you could trust him to do so many different things. Slot, he'd roll to the middle. He would do different things. And he now gives Notre Dame that weapon that adds to that as well. And so I think that's something that you look at and say, it adds to me, he's considered a safety, but I consider the nickel, the way he plays it, more of a cornerback than I do a safety, in my opinion, which adds to the depth.
Oklahoma State in that nickel position have been so important for that defense over the last couple of years. You think about even with Tanner McCall. I mean, people will probably remember Tanner McAllister when Notre Dame played them, and Tanner didn't even have a great game in that game. That was Lorenzo Styles, was incredible in that football game as a freshman. But I mean, Brian, this is why this is an abnormal feeling for a lot of people. And I think that some people are still hesitant on it because they're like, I don't think this is real yet. Right. But you're looking at it and you're like, the last time you felt this good about quarterback and Notre Dame on the perimeter has been a very, very long time. So, I mean, I'm trying to remember the last time I felt good about both of those in the same season, man. Like that's a long conversation to try to figure that out, right? Like I don't know, man.
1993.
Wow, not that far back.
I mean, to where, I mean, let's be serious, to where both of those positions were really good.
Yeah.
2018, I didn't have a lot of faith in Ian Book was going to win those big games. You know my stance on Ian Book. Nice kid, hard worker, good leader, but just not that dude. 2015, maybe you could argue 2015 to a degree with Malik and Deshaun plus, Kavari and Cole Luke. I think quarterback was a little bit more of a question mark then. The talent was there. Before that, I mean, the only good quarterback they had before that, Everett in 2012. But, I mean, Everett was a redshirt freshman. And, it was Bennett Jackson and Kavari Russell as a true freshman, really a great corner duo? I don't think so. Then they had great quarterbacks in Charlie's era, but they never had great corners in Charlie's era, right? And so, yeah, I think you have to go back to who was the best quarterback before that? Arnaz Battle before he got hurt, like Jarius Jackson. Yeah. They didn't have great corner. I mean, Brock Williams and Jarius Jackson overlap at some point in time, but that wasn't a great corner. 2002, you had a pretty good cornerback duo in Shane Walton and Vontez Duff.
Yeah,
she didn't have great quarterback situation, right? So, yeah, it's probably 1993 with Kevin McDougal and like Bobby Taylor and who was the other corner on that team? I'm drawing a blank here, but they had, that secondary was riddled with NFL players in 1993. You had backups that were they got drafted from that secondary at Notre Dame. So yeah, oh boy. And if you really want to get down to it, since Kevin McDougal was a little bit of an unknown going into that season, you'd have to go back to 89 with Tony Rice and Stan Smagala and Todd Light, right? That's how long it's been since I've had this much optimism about those two positions heading into a season. So
and that in some of the biggest football games. Like again, I'm picking Alabama game in 2020 as kind of the example of this, but that has been a couple positions that there has been a clear advantage from some of the best football teams in college football. That's the two of the spots. I guarantee if we polled the chat, and if the chat wants to respond to this, I please do. And maybe we'll talk about this on the message board at some point later. But if I asked you, what are the two positions that have most needed to be upgraded for Notre Dame over the last couple of years? Guarantee it would be quarterback and corner. I guarantee it that those would be the two spots. Maybe wide receiver would be in that conversation for some people. Maybe, but I really think cornerback.
But there's been some good years with good receivers. 2019 receiving core is pretty good. 2020 was pretty good receiving core. Javon McKinley had a very good year that year. Ben Skronik was a nice player. Kevin Austin was a guy you expected things from before he got hurt. So, at this point in time going into 2020, we're expecting a big breakout from Kevin Austin, and we're expecting Javon McKinley to do well and, all types of things like that. But no, you're right, Ryan. I want to get to the next category, Mr. Roberts. And this is a group, as you mentioned, of units that we can't, if we're being objective, right? If we're trying to have honest football conversation, not like we're fans and we want to convince ourselves that this is good. These are positions that have a lot of potential, but it's too much of an unknown and unproven commodity at those positions to be able to justify putting them in that first category. and there's two. And they are two of the biggest wild cards on this team. And in my opinion, if all three of the ones above play to their potential, this is still not a championship team unless these two groups also go from the category they're in now, which is a lot of potential, but still a question, but they have to prove it, basically. This is the prove it list, right, of teams that units we think could be really good, but they've got to prove it. And if we're being objective, we can't include them in the top group till they prove it. And it's wide receiver and defensive line. The two biggest wild cards, because these could be really impressive strengths of this team, and they could end up being disappointing. And all the ranges in between. And where they go there, in my opinion, did like the rapture just happen at your house, Ryan? Because it just got like really bright, like there's like an angelic presence.
I wasn't even looking on this screen too, which makes it even worse. Because usually I try to help that, when it actually happens, but I wasn't even looking on this screen, and then that happened. Of course, I hate this. I hate this
like
room so much.
Some angel just lit up in your room, and I'm like, oh no, that's not happening in my place. I'm not being taken. Oh, no.
If I turn off every light in here, it gets too dark. If I turn on one simple light, then I have this weird lights, and it's just, I don't know, man. This room is awful.
We'll get her figured out. Figured out.
Yeah.
So Ryan, to the conversation, I want to start out receiver.
Yep.
I mean, this is a no-brainer. When you and I are having this conversation, this is the group that you and I said on offense had to be in the. We actually started this second category for this unit and the defensive line. I mean, it's like we just didn't know where to put them. So we're like, and you had mentioned like let's 3 categories and for this group, and receiver's the one there where you can't objectively look at it and say it's a strength of the team right now because it hasn't proven to be so. All we're asking Sam Hartman to do is just be you, right? All we're asking the offensive line is just be you. Hey, Audric, just be you. Be what we already know you to be. Just do that.
Yeah.
It's not true on the defensive line of receiver. When you look at receiver, Ryan, it is still a tremendous unknown. I'm excited about the potential of it, but as we always say, potential doesn't win you football games. Production does. And right now, this unit has to prove that it can produce.
It's such a major wild card, man, because I mean, we've had this conversation already like 17 times probably this offseason of like, who's the wide receiver that breaks out and is the guy in 2023, right? Like it could be Jaden Thomas. It could be Tobias Merriweather. It could be Deion Colsey, maybe one of the freshmen or substantial difference makers at some point during the season. There's a lot of talent. There's a lot of options. But when there's a lot of options, usually, Brian, that means that there isn't proven production, right? It's talents. Unless you're talking about like Alabama 2019 with like Jerry Jeudy and Devonta Smith and Jalen
Ohio
Watt.
State's had some units like that, right? Where they go 3-4 deep, right?
I mean, it's like last year's Ohio State team is a good example. It's like Julian Fleming is the clear wide receiver 3 on this team, and he was a 5-star recruit, right? Like those types of situations are great to be in. For Notre Dame, this is some of the more talented wide receiver groups that we have seen in several years for Notre Dame, but it's not proven production, right? Like there is a lot of question marks. Your leading receiver coming back had 300-something yards in Jaden Thomas last year. So you don't 100% know what to expect, which means that there's volatility to this group. But the other side of not developing is that this team, this wide receiver unit could be really good, man, because one side of the field, I'm looking at a 6'4", 205-pound Tobias Merriweather, who's incredibly talented. On the other side, I'm looking at a 6'5", 215-pound Deion Colsey, who's incredibly talented. Former top 100 recruits, right, in that range by several outlets. And then you look at Chris Tyree, dynamic ability potentially in the slot. Jaden Thomas was your best receiver at the end of the season last year. Then you talk about what you saw from Jaden Greathouse in the spring, what you saw from Rico Flores, what you saw from Braylon James. There are so many options here. It's volatile because it hasn't turned into proven production yet, but you feel great about this because you're in a situation where not only is there a lot of talent, the most depth you've probably had from a talent perspective in a while, you also have a wide receiver coach who is clearly at least an upgrade over the last wide receiver coach. How great he is still going to be determined because he hasn't been coaching very long, but I'm very optimistic for what Coach Chancey Stuckey can accomplish here because he has a lot of talent to work with, and he's done a very good job in a limited time, obviously, of being a position coach on the college level.
It's what it has that's unique, Ryan, is it has a chance to have a very diverse skill set at wide receiver. You have an opportunity to have a big, tall, physical boundary player like a Deion Colsey, if he can step up. You have a chance to have a long, uh, rangy, field stretch the field type of guy at X and Tobias Merriweather. You have a chance to have a really physical, work the zones, be great on third down, be a tough matchup on those type of areas and different things like that, and in the slot. And then you have a guy like a Chris Tyree that brings a dynamic home run ability. How is he going to be used? That remains to be seen. And that's part of this conversation. We don't know how he's going to be used. You see a freshman class that brings some juice on the outside, some dependability on the inside, some route running precision on the outside. There's all these different skill sets, and it has the makings of something special, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, the reason that we have to have it in this category, and if you're going to put it in any category, if we got rid of this one, you'd have to put it in the third category of, question mark, and has a lot, a lot to prove that a lot of work is needed, because again, you don't win championships with potential.
Yep.
Clemson didn't win a championship because they had a lot of potential at receiver and a lot of potential in the D line, a lot of potential quarterback, a lot of potential running back. No, they won because those units produced.
Yes.
The talent equaled production, not the potential equaled whatever.
T.
Right?
Higgins was a dude, and Justin Ross was a dude, and that's
Travis
why
Etienne
you won.
was a dude.
Yeah,
and then you had
and
then you had the great complementary players like Hunter Renfrow, guys like that. Artavius Scott, the 2016 team had Mike Williams, who's a stud. Hunter Renfrow was part of that team as well. But then you had like Artavius Scott, who was a really, just a chain mover, averaged like 9-10 yards a catch, but caught a ton of balls. You had Deion Kane. One of the big plays that Clemson had in that game that kind of got their offense finally going, because weren't they trailing Bama like 14-0 early in that 2016 game?
Yep.
Well, who's the guy that sparked the offense to their first touchdown? I believe it was Deion Kane with a catch and run, if I remember correctly. Caught a pass, it wasn't Mike Williams. It wasn't Wayne Gallman. It wasn't Deshaun Watson running around doing something crazy. It was Deion Kane, who was like their third or fourth receiver on that team. Talented kid, but, stepped up and made a play. You look at Georgia this year, Ryan, and you think of all the guys that could make plays for them this year, and like, who were some of the guys that made the plays when it mattered most? It was like their third receiver. It was like, it wasn't Brock Bowers. It was
just Lad McConkey.
Yeah, it was it was Lad McConkey or the Mitchell kid, right? Who stepped up big in the postseason.
Mitchell, right, or whatever his name is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was those kind of things. You look at the game in 2016. It wasn't Mike Williams that made the game-winning catch for the touchdown against Bama. It was Hunter Renfrow.
Yeah.
So you can't just have a dude. You need multiple dudes. And you need to be able to spread the ball around. You need to be able to say, hey, we don't just have one guy that can make plays for us. We have a lot of guys can make plays for us.
You need your Hunter Renfrow. I mean, he was at Clemson since 1987. So like, you always need that guy, man. I mean, he was there for like 30 years.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, Ryan Mitchell had 2 touchdowns in the postseason, 4 catches for 65 yards and 2 touchdowns in the postseason.
Yeah.
You know how many, you know what his production was in the regular season?
No idea.
He had 5 catches for 69 yards. Caught 4 passes for 65 yards and a touchdown against Oregon. Had 1 catch for 4 yards against Samford. Got hurt and didn't come back till late in the year.
Yep.
I mean, guy hadn't been counted on all year because he was hurt, and he comes back and steps up and makes plays. That's where you need to be, right? And that's where this group has a chance to be, but they've got to prove it, Ryan. If this team is going to be what it is or what it's capable of, this unit has to take from where they are and step it up. That means Deion Colsey needs to come out this offseason and sort of have a look in the mirror moment and ask himself, Deion, and I'll say it to him, right? If he doesn't listen to our show, but this is what I'd say to him. Like, Deion, you have a chance to be great, not just good. You have a chance to be great. You have tools that not a lot of people have. The question is, how bad do you want it?
Yep.
Where do you have that dog inside of you? Do you have that just dig down deep and just, I'm better than you, and I know I'm better than you, and I'm going to work every day to show all these There's a lot of people doubting Deion Colsey.
Yep.
And take that fuel. I don't care what you use as fuel, but get it going, right? Because if Deion digs deep and that comes out of him, that I'm going to do every single day this summer. I'm going to do something to make myself great. I'm going to study tape of great receivers. I'm going to go out there and work on my footwork. I'm going to catch 1,000,000 balls. If I don't catch 1,000 passes today, I'm not doing this right. And 1,000 passes, I mean, this is what I told my players. Hey, I don't have a gym to work out in. It was raining all day. I said, that's fine. Lay in your bed at night. Let your eyes adjust to the darkness and throw the ball up in the air and catch it. Because if you can get locked in on the cross at the edge of the ball in the dark and really focus on it, that's catching balls. That's teaching your mind and your eyes and your hands to work together. It doesn't always have to be a thing where you're out on the jugs machine. There's a lot of ways to make yourself a great receiver. Do you think Jerry Rice in high school in Mississippi had a jugs machine? Right? Do you think Mississippi Valley State had phenomenal facilities that he could go work out at?
Cinder blocks, man.
Right,
he had bricks
exactly.
And cinder blocks. Yeah,
get it done. Go out there every day and do something to make yourself better, and just challenge yourself every single day. Same thing to Tobias Merriweather. Like, look, you've got all the tools in the world. Make sure every single day you leave no stone unturned when it comes to perfecting your craft. Make sure that you're spending that time in the weight room. Because that's what we saw in the spring game, right? Like Dion and Tobias had some good routes. And then there was plays where just like, are they taking this play off? Are they, what's going on there, right? And hopefully they can kind of look at Jaden Thomas and be like, yeah, I need to work like that guy. Because that guy works. I mean, you just see Jaden when he's not getting the ball, he's working. I mean, he's blocking somebody, he's doing something. And it just comes down to that, man. It just comes down to, do they have that inner fortitude of every guy wants to be great, but that's not what I'm talking about. It's when I say, every guy wants to be great in their head until the first hard workout or until the first time. Well, yeah, I know I need to go work out, but I'm in this tournament online that I'm playing. I also play video games. My girl wants to go out today. It's too hot outside. It's too wet outside. All the excuses in the world.
Nobody says to themselves, I want to be average at this. I want to be okay at this. Like, everybody wants to be great until your point, Brian, until you have to put that work in, man.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the question mark, is do they want that? Next one, Ryan, is defensive line. This is another unit that we look at and say, I can talk my way into believing this is going to be a great defensive line this year. And we could go to guys on the third team who I could talk my way into being that. But it's talk right now. It's talk right now. Yep. Jason Onye's talk right now, meaning, yeah, we saw some great things in the spring, but we didn't see it against Ohio State yet, or NC State yet, or USC yet. It's still just talk. It's still just potential. This is another unit. Jordan Patelho, potential. Riley Mills, potential. When we stop talking about potential and start talking about production, then this unit will have arrived. But as of right now, receiver and D-line is still an on-paper strength, in my opinion. And if that changes, that's how this team becomes a championship team. Because if you can have a D-line that's disruptive with the cornerback tandem that Notre Dame is going to have, that's how you put a championship caliber defense on the field.
Yeah. I mean, I think the defensive line this year, it's another one of those positions it's a volatile one. Like last year, you were expecting the defensive line to be good. Why, Brian? Because you had Isaiah Foskey, who ends up being the all-time leading sacker in Notre Dame history, right? Like, you have that guy. And then you also have Jason Abalola, who was coming off of a good season in 2021. Like, he was good. But this year, I really I'm excited about it. I'm excited about the possibilities because there's not as much proven commodities coming back as there was last year. But I feel like there's more guys we're talking about this offseason, which is exciting, right? Like, you're talking about Jordan Patelho and Joshua Burnham and Junior Tuilamaka and Jason Onye and Howard Cross and Gabriel Rubio and Riley Mills and Javonte Jean-Baptiste. Like, there's a lot of names on that defensive line this year, which is different. But again, it's a similar category to wide receiver. It's one of those situations where I think that there's an opportunity that Notre Dame could be really good on the defensive line. I'll say it like this. Just from a pure physical gift perspective in an attack style defensive front, I think Notre Dame's got some dudes, man, as far as just straight up athletes. Like Jordan Patelho whenever he tries to shoot for the NFL dreams, I think he's going to test phenomenally because he is incredibly twitchy, right? Joshua Burnham is incredibly twitchy. Jason Onye looks like $1 million on the hoof. Riley Mills is 6'5" and some change, 296 pounds with good length. You have a lot of guys that look like NFL defensive linemen. You have a lot of guys in that room. But again, not a ton of proven production. I'm excited about Jordan Botelho. He had 4.5 sacks last year in very limited opportunities. But you know what happens sometimes when you up people's amount of snaps is they get less productive. That sometimes happens. Actually, it happens a lot, if we're being honest. So there's a lot of talent, there's a lot of projection, but it's a volatile group because at the end of the day, this could be an excellent group, or this could be an average group. I mean, there is a lot of middle ground on this one, Brian, but like, I don't 100% know what to expect from this team, which is why you can't put them in the top group
from the unit,
there's
right?
Not proven production, but it's not the bottom group, certainly, because there's a reality where this defensive line is really, really good in 2023. It's just you need to turn talent into production this offseason.
Ryan, I think I will make this claim here. Notre Dame cannot win a championship, cannot compete for a championship, might not even be able to make the playoff if these two units aren't strengths of this team. Not just play okay, strengths. I don't think you can go 2-1 against Ohio State, Clemson, and USC, which is the minimum of what you need to do to make the playoff, if these two units don't play well in those games. I don't think you can. I don't care how good the quarterback, running back, offensive line, and cornerbacks are. That'll get you to 9-3. Those units playing at a championship level get you to 10-2. Let's say 10-2. Let's be optimistic today. Let's be good. Let's be good boys today and be nice and friendly and in a positive mood. At best, that gets you 10-2, right? If those are the only three strengths that you have. I mean, they showed last year with just a great offensive line and great corners, you can beat Clemson 35-14, right? But Clemson's not the roadblock for Notre Dame anymore. Ohio State is. Alabama is. Georgia is. Those are the roadblocks for Notre Dame. And so you can't beat those teams if receiver and D-line don't become strengths. At the very least, play well in those games. I don't even need the receivers to play great every single week. There's 8 teams in the schedule that Notre Dame can beat when the receivers just playing okay in games. If the O-line, backs, and quarterback are playing great. But you're not going to beat Clemson and Ohio State and USC and whoever you get in the playoff with the receivers just playing okay. Your offensive line's not that good. You know what other offensive lines weren't that good? The 2017 offensive line or the 2015 offensive line weren't that good where you're going to be the best teams in college football without your receivers playing well. And do you know how I know that? Because we saw that. We saw that they can't always carry the load in those games. You need other parts of your team to step up and make plays. And that's going to be the key in these two units. And I will say it's even more important for the defensive line because at least on offense, you have a couple other strengths. You have running backs, quarterbacks, offensive line. That's why I say the receivers don't have to be great all the time. The defensive line needs to be a consistent strength for this football team next year. It really does.
Agree.
And if it's not, then this team won't reach its full potential. It'll be good. It'll be fun to watch because they'll score points, but it won't be a championship caliber team. Well, they'll look more like Oklahoma than they will. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Ryan.
I was just going to say it sets the table because I just had a conversation with Carson Hobbs yesterday, for instance, Brian. We were talking about how nice it is to have guys like Bryce Young in front of you and such, right? Where it's like cornerbacks, defensive backs, they understand the importance of being strong up front. And then linebackers, I mean, they directly understand it, right? Because if a defensive line's getting blown off the ball and offensive linemen are just able to get up to the second level in the run game, linebackers going to have a tough day, man. They are. Linebackers are so dependent on being good up front, what's in front of you, and cornerbacks, safeties, interceptions that usually happen one of two ways. One, usually a defensive back is in zone where their eyes are back to the quarterback and they make a proactive play. Or two, there's pressure on the quarterback and they make a bad decision, right? Like that's where mistakes happen when there's pressure. And pressure comes most often from the defensive line. Last year, too often, There was inconsistencies from a pressure perspective. That's why I think that Al Golden at times last year had to consistently just blitz all day, man. Like just throw the kitchen sink out. And it didn't work all the time, obviously, right? And that hurts two different areas of your football team. If your defensive line is strong, you're going to be strong defensive unit usually, like because it's going to make linebackers better and it's going to force more turnovers because your defensive backs are going to be able to be more advantageous because quarterbacks are going to be put into bad positions. So I agree, defensive line is paramount, and they're the table setters of the defense. They really are.
Now we get into the last category, Ryan, and this is going to have a big say in just how good Notre Dame is going to be. And this happens every year. There's question marks, right? What was a question mark for Georgia going into 2021? Is your quarterback good enough?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Are they going to be good enough at quarterback in 2021? Well, they weren't early on, and they benched their quarterback, and the guy came in and played good football and eventually was able to make plays in some big moments to help them win games that year, right?
Yep.
We see it every year. Last year, is their receiving core going to be good enough? Well, guy stepped up and did enough to help them win games because there's no team that includes 2019 LSU. It includes 2018 Clemson. It includes 2012 Bama, where every single position is a strength. Right. Some positions just need to be good and be along for the ride. Just don't get us beat.
Yes.
And that's kind of how we come into these next groups. Now, the interesting thing is a couple of these positions, in my opinion, at least one for sure, has a chance to be a strength. But right now, it's just too big of a question mark. And how well these units play, essentially, is gonna also have a big factor on how good Notre Dame can be because they can't be liabilities. And right now, on paper, they're big question marks where will they be good enough to get there? I think the first one is tight end, and this is an interesting one, Ryan, because the conversation that you and I had, or you and I are having about tight end, is not that it lacks the talent. I'm not even concerned about the lack of production because we know why the unit hasn't produced. It's because Michael Mayer's been there blocking it. The minute he steps aside, this unit goes into the bowl game and plays well. But right now it's tight end because of injuries. That's the reality one. The reality of it.
I mean, what was the number in the blue gold game, Brian? Was it 6 tight ends were on the injury list at that point, right?
I mean, they had 2 healthy scholarship tight ends.
Yeah.
Because there were some backup guys too. So Davis Sherwood and Holden Stace was it. That was it.
And obviously we don't know exactly what, the long-term implications of like Mitchell Evans are, for instance, right? Like if it's more precautionary so we'll find out more obviously on that one leaving the offseason, but Mitchell Evans was limited in the blue gold game, not able to play. We know that Eli Raridan is coming back from a second ACL tear. You know that Kevin Bauman is a guy that's been often injured in his Notre Dame career. So, I mean, you're talking about 3 tight ends that were going to be 3 of your top 5 tight ends on the depth chart are all injury question marks at this point. Like, that's just kind of where you are with this situation. I love Holden Stace, right? But if Mitchell Evans isn't ready to go, is Holden Stace ready to be the tight end 1 on the roster as a sophomore? There's a question there, right? I mean, certainly talent-wise, he's good enough to be that guy at some point in his career, but is he ready to do it right now? That's a question. Eli Raridan being hurt is a big bummer for Notre Dame because I really think if Eli would have just stayed healthy this past year and didn't have the second tear, we have a completely different outlook of this roster right now because you're like, oh man, Mitchell Evans, Eli Raridan, Holden Stace, and then Davis Sherwood is your 4th tight end. Like you feel pretty dang good about that situation. But it's just a depth issue, man. Like I think Mitchell Evans could be tight end 1 for this team this year. I think Eli Raridan has incredible upside as a tight end. I think Holden Stace could be a really valuable member of a tight end room. But 2 of the 3 guys I just mentioned, Brian, are out with injuries right now. Like that's just where we are with this. So it's the depth is the concern, and that's just kind of the baseline of this conversation is that their tight end room certainly has talent. There's no doubt. But with that many injuries, I'm in a situation where unless there's some health that is, kind of recouped this offseason, then you might need to change your offense around a little bit more, right? And we talked about Notre Dame maybe running a little more 11 personnel just in general because you have more wide receivers than you've had over the last couple of years from a depth perspective. But Notre Dame traditionally has been a team that the tight end position has been incredibly important to an offensive structure, just historically. And right now, you still like the potential of the group, but there are major question marks from a health perspective. Like, no one can skate around that. Mitchell Evans not playing in the blue gold game, combined with Eli Raritan out without a completely understood timeline, without Kevin Bauman, who's been banged up with injuries. That tight end position is one that is just, there's more question marks than answers at the moment, but there could be answers that come for us. But as of right now, we can't just look past this and be like, no big deal. Like, there is some concern that has to be there with the tight end room.
I think another position, Ryan, is right now is linebacker. This is another one that I look at and say this position should be a lot better than it is. This one's unique because it's not just about the players. It's also about the coaching. The coaching has to be flat out has to be better here. I don't have any issue, like you just mentioned, right? That once you, I don't know if Jared Parker is really a good coach, man. I don't know if he is or isn't. I'm not sure, right? No, not an issue. It's like we know the guy can coach. The question is, can they stay healthy? We're worried about the talent. Can they stay healthy? Linebacker, it's twofold. It's number one, they have to play better because they haven't played well.
Yes.
And number two, they have to be coached better. It's a two-way street, and that's what makes this a little bit of a question mark for me. There's a more narrow margin for error, I guess, a wider array of things that have to go well. You have to coach better and play better. And those are the things that I look at and I say, hey, look, the potential's there for this unit to be better. And here's what needs to happen. Number one, you need to somewhat simplify the defense. I'm not saying you have to have 3 calls, okay? But you can't have as much going into, and you need to have a greater foundation. And you can't just change your defense completely from week to week. You have to have a better foundation, number one.
Yeah.
Number two, more emphasis on technique. The reason that there's what happens with veteran NFL players, it's a little bit of a different deal, but even then it can happen. But in college, if you don't focus on fundamentals on a daily basis and still make it a part of what you're doing and emphasizing in the regular season, and you're so caught up in scheme, your players are going to be in the right place at times and still miss tackles. Yep. And still make mistakes. So more fundamentally sound from a coaching standpoint. And then number 3, what the coaches can do to make this unit better is have real competition. I don't care how much you love J.D. Bertrand. I don't care how much you love Jack Kaiser. I don't care how much you love Maris Luafau. They have to earn those spots again. Now, I fully expect J.D. Bertrand to do that, and I expect Jack Kaiser to have a very important role in this defense. But you have to, let Marist truly have to outplay those younger guys, and don't hold the younger players to a higher standard. That's the thing that bothers me more than anything last year. If a younger player came in and made a mistake, he was like yanked. But Marist could make mistake after mistake after mistake and nothing happened. Some coaches do this, and it blows my mind why you hold the younger players to a higher standard than the older players. They would do this with the receivers as well. Under Kelly, a starting receiver would make a big mistake and he'd get yelled at, but he'd put him back. Younger guy goes in there and makes a mistake and he never plays again. You can't do that. Let Ziegler, let Jalen Sneed, let Drake Bowen, let Jaden Alsbury, let Preston Zinter truly battle for playing time, and then have a legit rotation, right? To where if one guy's not playing well, you can just ride the hot hand. If Maris comes out and he's playing well one game, great, let him ride it. But still, make sure that other guy's playing. And if come into a game and Maris is not playing well, or Maris may be playing okay, but Nolan's hot or Jalen Seed's hot, then you ride it. But it's got to be true competition. And then it's up to the players to say, hey, we've got to be better. We can't blame the coaches for this. We've got to be better. I'm in the hole. I got to make the tackle. I can't blame my coach. Hey, coach didn't work on fundamentals. Okay, then you work on the fundamentals. You're a 5th-year freaking senior. You know what to do. Now, they shouldn't be asked to do that, but that's what leadership is, right? But when you're there, have that intestinal fortitude to say, I'm here. I got to make the play, right?
Right.
And so it's a two-way street to this unit. And here's the thing, they don't have to jump up into the first category. They don't. They just have to be good. They don't have to be great. They just have to be good. They have to be the Georgia wide receivers. Do your job every snap. I don't need you to have 15 tackles and 8 tackles for loss in the game. I don't need you to go all Jalen Smith against Michigan from 2014. I don't need you to be that guy. But here's what I need you to do. I need you to do your job of every single snap. Just do your job. That's it. Just do your job. And if they do that, then I think this group is going to be fine. Because there's more talent than this is the misnomer this is the mistake I think fans make. Because a guy doesn't play well, you assume he's just not good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's to me, like, this is the mistake fans made with Holton there, Harrison Smith. He's just not a very good player. He was overrated, whatever. No, he's playing a bad position he shouldn't be playing. And then he moves to safety. There are still some Notre Dame fans that even in 2010 and 2011 did not appreciate Harrison Smith. I remember these conversations. They still not appreciate Harrison Smith because all they could do is remember what he was playing linebacker. That's it. Guy's going to be a Hall of Famer, in my opinion. But that's all they could remember is he was never that good at Notre Dame. I've literally had Notre Dame fans say, well, he was never that good at Notre Dame. I'm like, did you not watch the 2010 and 2011 seasons? Because he was freaking amazing in those two seasons. But he was at a position he wasn't playing well. Bad play doesn't always equal that you're not good, or I should say that you're not talented. Okay, sometimes talented players play poorly, and I'll tell you this, Osmar Bilal had a pretty darn good 5th year at Notre Dame.
Yep,
he never played the way that J.D. Bertrand is now for 2 seasons. So why can't J.D. Bertrand become an even better player? Why are we assuming he can't? Oh, he's not. He's not athletic. Yes, he is. Just stop. Okay, stop. Yes, he is. Jack Kaiser, athleticism is not a problem. They've got to play better. They got to be more assignment correct. They got to be more fundamentally correct. And then when they are there and the ball's there, they got to make the plays. Simple as that. Simple as that. And they didn't do that last year. And the guys that don't do that, and here's the thing, if JD doesn't come out and play well this year, put the next guy in. And that's the mistake that Al Gold made last year. I can't sacrifice scheme. I got to leave the veterans in there because they know the calls. Bull crap. Yeah. That's a you problem. Have less calls. Let the more talented players play because this ain't working. And if Coach Golden finds that happy, and again, this isn't going to some basic 3-call defense. It's find that happy medium sweet spot. And if you can find that happy medium sweet spot, this front seven is going to be really freaking good. Really freaking good. I just don't know if they're going to do that. And we could even throw Al Golden into this conversation of the not sure yet from a coaching standpoint, but we're trying to focus on the players today in this conversation. But they're going to need that group to get better, but they don't need them to be great. They need the D-line to be excellent. They don't need the linebackers to be excellent, Ryan. They don't need the safeties to be excellent, and that's the next group we're going to talk about. This is probably the biggest question mark that I have on the team, Ryan. Would you, from a
offensive depth and defense impact perspective, right? Like, yeah, it's a weird conversation, man, because safety, because it's been such an open topic this spring as well, right, Brian? Like, usually coaches are very secretive with like, yeah, we're going to go to the portal and we need to get help outside of the program. Chris O'Leary's not high in the fact that like they need to get a safety this offseason to help with depth. They do, because I think that and we go back to the recruiting side of things, right? We talked a whole lot about Peyton Bowen's year one impact if he ends up at Notre Dame. Then you talk about Brandon Hillman, obviously with the high upside that he has. Both those guys end up not in the 2023 class, and you needed those numbers. And not only the numbers of just simply more depth to the room, because there's not a ton of depth in the safety room right now, but also the impact talent is something that you need to add to there, because I think that I've been victim of this a little bit. And we talked about this, I think yesterday or one of the last podcasts, but we are just so counting on Xavier Watts just being a dude this season, right? Like it's a foregone conclusion. And we forget that Xavier Watts still has a lot to prove too, just because he hasn't done it at a high volume yet at the safety position. After that, though, you're like, Ramon Henderson has been very inconsistent during his Notre Dame career. You talk about DJ Brown, who is a good member of a football team, has been an okay contributor in certain roles during the duration of his career, but we know that DJ Brown shouldn't be a starting safety on this defense in 2023. And then after that, though, you're talking about a couple of true freshmen. Maybe Thomas Harper is a guy that you can use in some spots at the safety position. There's just not a lot of impact depth is kind of the biggest thing that I look at in this group, Brian. I mean, if Xavier Watts doesn't show up and isn't an absolute dude, then I'm just not sure where the impact is coming from the safety position necessarily, because there's just a lot of question marks here. And the question, and what makes safety such a tough position to project, is not only is there impact question marks as far as high level, there's also the depth conversation. So that's why I think that it has to fit in the third category, because you could fit the second category for some of these positions if there is a lot of depth, but you still have questions on the impact, or vice versa. unfortunately, safety is a position that has both of those concerns right now.
I have a feeling they're not going to get a transfer portal safety. I hope I'm wrong, but I have a feeling that's going to be the case. And so one of two things is going to happen, and I really hope that the second thing happens. Number one is they're going to start playing Thomas Harper there more, which I think is a mistake. A, he's a nickel. B, he's coming off a shoulder injury.
Yeah.
C, he's undersized for a safety. Those last two things, bad freaking combination. A safety has to be more physical than a nickel. That's just a fact. It just is. Does anyone here think Tariq Bracy could have been a safety last year? No. Played just fine at nickel, right? The second option is you move one of the corners or a couple of the corners there. Christian Gray, from what I understand, Ryan, is going to be fine. It wasn't like a torn ACL. I don't believe it was anything like that.
I think it was a scope. It was just a knee scope.
Right,
yeah.
Which means he probably just had like just some damage. It could get cleaned up quickly. He should be fine. You get Micah Bell in. You've got Thomas Harper in the slot. You've got Cam Hart coming back. You've got Benjamin Morrison. You've got Jaden Mickey. You've got Chance Tucker. That's 6 guys right there, right? Micah Bell right now would be your 6th guy of that group. It's the fastest player on your football team. At worst, the second fastest player on your football team. Him and Chris Tyree. That's the conversation, and that's it.
I want to see that race still. I still want to see that race.
I want to see that race at 50, and I want to see that race at 100. I think at 50, I think Tyree wins. I think at 100, Micah Bell wins.
That's fair. Yeah.
To me, right, I want to see 2 moves now to safety. If you don't get a transfer guy, I want to see 2. I want to see Ryan Barnes and Clarence Lewis move to safety. I do. That's what I want to see happen. Now, Clarence, they can still play nickel, but have them cross-train at safety and provide depth.
It's pretty easy to cross-train a safety and a nickel together. Like, it's not difficult. It's actually easier than cross-training outside corner and nickel. Like, I think that safety and nickel have a lot more similarities, especially in Notre Dame's defense, than an outside corner and a nickel, man. Like, that's very different. Like the two-way go is something for people to, when I say two-way go for nickels, it's that you are in a position where a wide receiver is going to go outside and inside or out. If they're playing outside receiver, you can force a guy to the sideline. So the sideline becomes an extra defender. Inside at nickel, there's a two-way go, 2 different options for them. And I really think that when you're playing safety, because a lot of times what happens, Brian, is that safeties get rotated down, right? And that they're going to have to be slot defenders. And in that instance, they basically become a nickel to a degree, right? At least the components of what they're asked to do are very similar. So I really think that outside corner and nickel cross train is a lot more difficult than the nickel and safety conversation.
There's one more on here, Ryan.
Yep.
Special teams. That's a question mark for me. Punter, place kicker, questions. Notre Dame has one of the best long snappers in college football, if not the best long snapper in college football. I expect the coverage units to be very good. The return game, we'll see. But there's plenty of options there in the return game. I mean, I can just think of a couple freshmen that I'd be totally fine going back there returning kicks, right? We 100%. Saw it in the spring game, Ryan. I knew you're going to get excited about this. Who was returning punts for the gold team in the spring game?
Jaden Greathouse, baby.
Boy. And you've been saying all along, don't be shocked if this kid is playing as your punt returner at some point in time down the road.
Great hands, man. Great hands back there, if nothing else.
He had 4 punt returns for touchdowns last year because he's strong, he's elusive, because one of the things that we've talked about is he's a lot better with the ball in his hands than people think, and give him credit for. But it's the kicking operation. You need a new holder, which shouldn't be a problem. You got plenty of receivers and quarterbacks and punters and stuff that can do that. If it comes down to it and you're losing to Ohio State or USC or Clemson or, you know what I mean? Playoff game or whatever, and you are down 2 and you need a field goal to win it right now, I don't have faith that that's going to get made because the guy that's going to be your kicker, I've never seen kick in person before. I've only seen him kick at South Florida. Not even here yet. I've only seen him kick at South Florida. Yeah. Now, he made a long kick at Florida this year, like a 50-yarder against the Gators this year, right?
Oh, I'm told he has a great leg, but to your point, Brian, like you haven't seen it, right? You just haven't seen it.
Yeah.
And Blake Grupe had a great leg too, and there was obviously inconsistencies there as well. Sure. So yeah,
that can't be ignored because when the margin for error is like really small for Notre Dame, you can't afford to have points missed because your kicker's not getting a job done, or because
Right.
I mean, one of the most underrated important aspects of last year's football team was John Sott. Because as frustrating as the defense was for Notre Dame last year, it was not a bad defense. It was still a good defense. It just wasn't as good as it needed to be or could have been. It was still a good top 25 caliber defense. Just a championship team needs a top 15 at least at Notre Dame. But the defense's job was constantly made easier by John Sott, who was just as steady of a punter as you're going to find, man.
Really good
You
punter.
know, it really is. It really is. And
far
so,
exceeded my expectations. I will
yeah.
say that he far exceeded
Yeah.
my
I
expectations.
mean, he was so steady. It's Krim, right? Is it Ben Krim is his
Ben
name?
Krim. Yeah.
Is he going to be that guy or not? I don't know. His numbers look very similar to what John Sott's were
Comparable.
in the same league. Very similar.
Yeah. Or could Bryce McPherson be that guy?
Right.
I mean, I don't
But
know. Right.
that's a good point. Part of the reason that John Sott was so effective is not because he had a phenomenal leg. He was not fazed by anything. It didn't matter. It's like he was so unaware of what was going on around him. He just didn't care. I'm going to catch it and punt it and do my job. And that's it. I don't care who we're playing, where it's at, whatever. I'm just going to go do my job. And that's the mindset of a kicker. I mean, the punters and kickers that have that mindset, it don't care how talented you are. It's the best kickers are the guys that have that mindset. Justin Yoon was so money because he didn't care. I have a job to do. Justin Yoon was the epitome of the Hoosiers moment that I talked about the other day. Hey, man, the rim's 10 feet tall. That's it. I mean, look, the dimensions to kick a field goal are the same, whether I'm at Clemson or Duke or Notre Dame or national championship. It doesn't matter, right? It's just do my job. And John Sott had some of that in him, right? We're just catch and punt it, man. It doesn't, all that other stuff doesn't matter. And if these kids have that, then they'll be fine. But until it's proven, it's a major question mark, in my opinion. Major question mark.
And I mean, it's still a question mark as far as even, you talked about the returners, right, Brian? I mean, but it is still a question mark as far as who those returners are, I mean, one thing that I think that we didn't give, well, I think we did, but I think as a fan base that we didn't give enough credit to for Brandon Joseph was actually a really solid punt returner last year for Notre Dame, man. He averaged right around 10 yards a punt return. Like, he was one of the better punt returners we've had at Notre Dame in a few years. I mean, from a average perspective. So I think Brandon Joseph was a really solid punt returner. Notre Dame needs to get their kickoff return game better than it was last year, man. Like, they just weren't able to get consistently good field position. So I think they have options at both kick and punt returner, but again, it's an unknown until we know who those guys are at the end of the day.
So, Ryan, that's going to do it for this part of the show. We're going to move on to the mailbag next. Before we get out of here, everybody, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and please share this podcast. If you're listening via podcast platform, please give us a 5-star review. And, of course, Ryan, you know what they need to do, man. Sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. And we got a ton of stuff going on, folks. I mean, we got CFB Nation has a new show out today. So if you are not subscribed to the CFB Nation podcast app, you need to do so. I also put those videos out on the CFB Nation YouTube channel. And so you can check those out as well. Bill Bender of Sporting News also released a top 25 today, updated preseason top 25 on his site. I talked about that in a new article at irishbreakdown.com, but he's the lead college football writer at Sporting News. He's also the co-host of the CFB All-America show on CFB Nation. And they talked about the new playoff calendar. They gave their thoughts on the new playoff calendar. And then they talked a little bit about the NFL draft from kind of a college football perspective. So they had two good shows out today. So you definitely want to check that out. But you got to subscribe to CFB Nation. Pretty soon, Lucky Lefty podcast. If you're listening, I know a lot of people here listen to Lucky Lefty podcast. If you're a Lucky Lefty listener here soon, you're not going to be able to find Lucky Lefty on the Irish Breakdown channel. It's only going to be on the CFB Nation channel. So definitely need to make sure that you subscribe to that. Right now, you can see it on the Irish Breakdown channel, but it's not going to be there for very long. So make sure that you go subscribe to CFB Nation channel so you can get their stuff. You can get Lucky Lefty, you can CFB All-America, and then you'll start getting our summer stuff. Because when I start doing summer stuff, we're going to start doing some college football stuff on the CFB Nation channel, and I'm only going to have that on the CFB Nation. I won't bring that over to the Irish Breakdown channel, so you're definitely going to want to check that out as well. So, Ryan, it's mailbag time, man. It's and we've got some things here that we'll dive into. Not a ton of questions yet, so unless y'all kind of get some more questions in there, we might actually get out of here at a decent hour today, right? Can you believe that?
I'll be able to get some work done today.
I know, right?
No
Imagine that. Imagine that. All right, here we go. Let's get rocking and rolling. Some of these are comments, but some of them are questions, but we'll just roll through all of them.
Well, this first one's from Matt McCarthy, who says 2015 definitely could have won a title if they didn't have an unprecedented number of injuries to key players and had a better defensive coordinator. 2 plays away from being 12-0. Stanford and Clemson both finished top 5 that year.
I mean, I don't think the injuries are why Notre Dame didn't finish that year. I mean, I name me a game where the injuries cost them that game. They didn't lose to Clemson because of an injury. You could say, I've said this, if Malik is not hurt, they beat Clemson. But I also feel if Brian Van Gorder was a better coach, they beat Clemson. But even if they lose to Clemson by a point late in the game, if they beat Stanford and handle their business against Wake Forest and Boston College, they're still a playoff team with a chance to go do something in the postseason. So I don't think the injuries were the issue for that football team. I think the issues for that football team were the defensive coordinator. But to your point, Matt, we agree with the premise. I would just somewhat nitpick them. I even think the depth of that team was – I mean, so you lose Jerron Jones, and what happens? Jerry Tillery steps into the starting lineup and plays well. You lose C.J. Prosise. I mean, you lose Torian Folston and C.J. Prosise and Josh Adams step in. Then C.J. goes down, and Josh Adams goes out and sets a Notre Dame freshman rushing record that year. You know what I mean? Sean Crawford gets hurt, and they overcame it, right? They battled through. They overcame it. So they were able to overcome. The only time I felt injuries really cost that team from being competitive was the Fiesta Bowl. Honestly, it was really the only one because because Sheldon Day got hurt like the day before the game. You remember he hurt his foot in practice or something like that the day before the game. I mean, it got a little bit bad then, but I mean, it was the defensive coordinator was the problem of that season. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of, Matt, too, why I push back on the notion like, oh, Notre Dame can't recruit well enough to compete for a championship. I mean, well, I think they've had a couple teams that were good enough to compete. And if they just were better at one team was just athletically, talent-wise, good enough to compete for championship. That 2015 team, Notre Dame team, was a coaching change away and a strength coach away from being a title team, in my opinion. Don't tell me they couldn't have beat freaking Jacob Coker. Don't come at me with that. No,
Alabama,
I'm sorry.
Great, man. Got a national championship under his belt. So yeah.
But
former Florida State great Jay Coker, man.
I mean, that Notre Dame team was the most athletic team that they faced all year, and the only team that I felt had better talent than them that year was the team that beat them in the Fiesta Bowl. That's it. As far as top to bottom, that Ohio State team was loaded.
Yeah, they were.
That was the only team that year, to me, top to bottom, had more talent than Notre Dame. To his point, you look at that 2015 team, there's a lot of NFL players on those two teams, on those two sides of the ball, and high-level NFL players. I mean, think about it. They had 3 first-round draft picks on that offensive line. You had a first-round draft pick at wide receiver. You had a second-round draft pick at quarterback. You had a third-round draft pick at running back. You had a second-round draft pick at center. And your right guard would have probably been a 5th or 6th round pick if he doesn't retire from football after his junior year. And you had a 7th round draft pick at tight end. You literally had an NFL caliber player at almost every position. And then the 2 receivers that weren't, they were still pretty good players for college football players, Amir Carlisle and Chris Brown. So yeah, that team was loaded. I mean, all 4 of the defensive linemen on that team are NFL players. Spent time in the NFL. Jerry Tillery was a 1st round pick. Sheldon Day was a 4th round pick, I believe, correct? Romeo Okwara did not get drafted, but he's the best NFL player of all of them, and it's not even close. And Isaac Rochelle got drafted. So, I mean, and your linebacker was the best linebacker in college football. I mean, think about it. That year, Notre Dame never took the field where they didn't have the most explosive defensive player on the field and the most explosive offensive player on the field. Never.
Yeah.
And wouldn't have against Bama either. I mean, that's just the reality of it. That team could have been special, and that's why coaching is – people why do you harp so much on coaching? It's exactly why we're right there.
Yeah.
Right there. Because coaching cost Notre Dame a championship. I would argue it also cost Notre Dame a championship in 1993 because I was never a big Rick Minter fan as a defensive coordinator either. But that's a different story for a different day. Yeah, right there, right?
Yes, it is. Next question is from David Lowe, who says, Where would you rank us preseason, Brian? See, a lot of people have us around 11. Is that too high or too low?
I'm fine with it. I mean, there's a range, Ryan, for me of 7 to 13 where I'm comfortable with Notre Dame being. Now, I said yesterday, I think they have a top 5 roster in college football. I believe that. But top 5 roster doesn't equal top 5 record.
Sure.
This is a team coming off of an 8-4 regular season. Yes, Sam Hartman should be a big upgrade on that, but I still have questions about this team. They still have things to prove. This team has still got to show me that they deserve. Like if you were to say, "Okay, Driscoll, you think they have a top 5 roster?" I do. So what would you think about me ranking them 4th? Nope, too high. They haven't earned that yet, right? Because having a roster is one thing, but then going out there and turning that roster into production. Here's a team that's every year has as good a roster as just about anybody. It's Penn State. And they never win anything meaningful. Why? Because they're not coached. Their roster never maximizes their potential. Go look at the NFL draft the last 5 years. There's only like 2 or 3 teams that have produced more NFL players than Penn State the last. It's like Bama, Georgia, and I think Ohio State. That's it.
And it's not slowing down anytime soon.
It's not slowing down. No, it's not. But they don't compete for championships because of other factors, right?
Yep.
So you got to prove it to me. So, I mean, I've seen like Sporting News is one that came out today that I'm 10th. All right, I'm fine with that. And USC 6th and Ohio State 4th. And, there's some teams that I would say, boy, that team shouldn't be that high. But I'd say that if you had Notre Dame 5th or 6th. I mean, I just would. They have a lot to prove. Now, the only time I have beef with people as far as where they have, like real beef, like you can't have that team had Notre Dame, is when people have Clemson had Notre Dame. But most people don't. Like the U.S. Sporting News one had Clemson 13th, Notre Dame 10th. That's fair. I mean, Notre Dame should be ranked higher than USC based on what? USC beat them last year.
Yeah.
By 11, and Notre Dame could have done this, coulda, but they didn't, and they lost by 11, and really never were in position to ever take a lead. Right? They were just in position a couple times to make it a single-digit game and then maybe go with some things. But they were never in position to like take a lead. USC outplayed them.
Yep.
So, and they have a lot coming back. So I have no problem with Notre Dame at 11. I have no problem if you want to put Notre Dame 7 or 8. Right? I just don't think I can justify higher than that preseason based on what you've been and projecting forward. They've got to prove to me. But here's the great thing about it, David. You can rank them 13th. You can rank them 18th. But if they win all their games, they're going to be top 4.
Yeah.
So it's in their destiny. It's in their control. I mean, you rank them 13th, it doesn't matter. The College Football Playoff Committee is not going to do a single ranking until after they've played Ohio State and USC. So it won't matter. If they're 19th preseason, it won't matter. If they beat those 2 teams and they're undefeated, they're in the top 4. Simple as that. So they'll have a shot, but I mean, Ryan, what do you think? I mean, to me, if somebody has them around 11, I've seen some teams have them at 13. My only quibble is I would not have that team ahead of Notre Dame, but then I could also argue there's a couple teams behind Notre Dame that you could argue should be ahead of Notre Dame as well. If we're being fair and objective, Notre Dame's got to prove something to me, and right now they're a team that went 9-4, and they still got to prove it.
That's fair. I mean, I would probably say a couple spots or higher, just a little bit. But to your point, Brian, you are what your record says you are from last year. But we also have to. I mean, we're in a transfer portal era, right? Where like things change so drastically from one offseason to the next. So like Sam Hartman does change the formula for me a little bit. I mean, I can't lie and say that the eye test doesn't change a little bit in that regard. You know what I mean? So like a couple spots higher. I'm not asking them to be a top 5 team in college football to start the year because like they don't deserve that. Like there's no doubt about that.
My only counter to that would be that I think Sam Hartman coming has impacted things because where'd they finish last year? 18th. So having them 11th is 7 spots higher than they were last year. So I think that is taking into account the different rosters. But to your point, it's more of a nitpick than it is oh my God, I can't believe you have Notre Dame 11th. That's insane. It should be 3rd.
No, it's not disrespectful or anything. It's not disrespectful.
No, it's fair questions. Like they've got to prove some stuff, especially because I think their schedule this year is much harder than it was last year. I know this top 3 teams are the same.
Yeah.
And it's more favorable home and away, but the depth of this year's schedule is, NC State spent most of last year ranked. Duke won 9 games last year, right? Then they go 9-4.
Yes, they did.
Last year, Louisville's got a new head coach who, to me, is just took Purdue to the Big Ten championship game. Right,
it's an upgrade over what you
Pitt's
had.
a decent team. Right, you've got Wake Forest in there, who they'll probably take a step back. You've still got Stanford. They can't be worse than they were last year. But again, you want to know why I'm not going to sit here and pound on the table and say that anyone that doesn't have Notre Dame in the top 10 is full of crap? It's because last year Notre Dame lost to a 3-9 Stanford team.
Sure,
they lost to Marshall. So and you got to prove to me you can beat those teams before I'm going to argue with people that you deserve to be in the top 10.
Yes.
I would have them in the top 10 personally. Right. I think your thing is fair. I think if I was doing my ranking, I'd probably have them 7 to 9. So I'd have to really look at who people have coming back. I would have Alabama ahead of them. I'd have Georgia ahead of them. I've had Ohio State ahead of them. I would have USC ahead of them. I would have Washington ahead of them for sure. I'd probably have Oregon ahead of them, probably, but I'd have to go back and look at. I'm not quite sure what Oregon has coming back on the offensive lines, to be completely honest with you. So there's certainly teams right there, like, okay, again, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, to me right now, all belong to be ranked ahead of Notre Dame, Washington, and USC. So that's 7 teams right there. Did I do that? So that's 7 teams right there that I think deserve to be ranked ahead of Notre Dame.
Yeah,
in some order.
So we're talking about 8 or 9 potentially.
Yeah, so that's 8. Now you start getting into arguments of, okay, what about LSU and Florida State? Right? Those are the other 2 teams that are in that conversation for me. Oregon's in that conversation for me, where you could have that type of thing. Now, LSU, I would not rank ahead of Notre Dame. I don't think LSU. They beat Alabama. Don't care. Alabama, fine. They also got blown out by Tennessee and got blown out by Texas A&M and all these other things. So, but if you were to have them ahead of Notre Dame, would I say you're nuts? No, I wouldn't say you're nuts. I personally would have Notre Dame a spot or 2 higher than LSU, and I'd have Florida State ahead of LSU. Because if you want to compare records, Florida State had a better record, and they beat LSU. They were leading the whole game. I know it got interesting late, but they led the entire game. And if Florida State doesn't fumble the ball at the 1-yard line, that game's over. Right. So – to me, Florida State you could make an argument for. I wouldn't have Florida State ahead of Notre Dame, but if you were going to say that you think they should be, Ryan, I wouldn't argue with you.
Yeah.
I'd probably argue with you a little bit more with LSU than I would Florida State, to be completely honest with you.
I only care what Notre Dame's ranking is in December when they're talking about the playoff conversation.
But you can say that, but we do have a lot of months before the season starts, so we need some things to talk about. So I'm not going to
we're going to blink our eyes. We're going to be there, man. We're going to blink our eyes. That's how this world works after you turn about 30, man. Is you
I
just
hope
blink
so.
your eyes.
I can't wait for this season to start. No doubt. No doubt.
Question now from Irish Gordian Knots. If Audric Estime struggles, how many chances do they give him? There's too much talent behind him to try and force a narrative, in my opinion. What's the narrative?
I don't get this question. Look,
Audric was really good last year. What narrative are we forcing?
So to me, there's one thing to say, well, a guy had a couple bad games, and so we're going to bench him.
He also ended the year on a great note after a little bit of a fumbling issue in the middle of the year.
I don't quite know what the narrative you're forcing. Look, if he struggles for the entire month of September, sure, okay. The only thing that I would
how are we qualifying struggling as well? I think is another question I would have.
I just can't get past the force the narrative part. I don't understand what you mean by that, which is fine. To me, the only way that I see him getting benched at all is if he does what he did what happened to him last year when he got benched, which is he's putting the ball in the ground a bunch. That's what matters to me. Yeah. But no, I don't know if there's a narrative that I'm concerned with, to be honest with you. He's their best back. He was their best back no matter who came back, based on how he finished the year and how the offseason's gone. So
it's not like he was just padding numbers based upon a lot of carries either. Right. Did he average like 5.9 yards a carry? Like that's a pretty healthy average.
He had 9 fewer carries than Logan Diggs and had almost 100 more yards.
Yeah.
So but no, if he struggles, how many chances do they give him? They'll keep riding him until he gets right, because that's what you do with great backs. There's you find stretches in Emmitt Smith's career, Barry Sanders' career, Terrell Davis's career, where they went 3-4 games where they didn't produce well, It's not always on them, but yeah, he's going to be the lead back.
Next question from Katie Keevers. She also said something earlier, Brian, that I wanted to find the comment on that I thought was really funny. Oh, I think it was lucky lefty listeners is hard to say. So we should, I wanted you to do it 5 times fast. If you
lucky
can,
lefty listeners, lucky lefty.
Fast.
No, I'm not doing it fast.
Fast.
I don't even know what I'll say, but yeah. Yeah.
Oh man, come on! I talked like Scooby Doo yesterday, and you can't even give me a lucky lefty listeners for 5 straight.
Sorry,
can't do it.
Sorry, can't do it. Can't do it.
Question from Katie Keevers: what would USC's record have been last year without Caleb Williams? Oh man,
boy.
I mean, my mind goes more to like the 500-ish, like 6-6, somewhere in that ballpark. Because I mean, Caleb was fantastic, but there was an upgrade of talent comparative to the year before that. It's like there's no doubt.
Yeah, I don't. I don't know if I mean, they had a significant upgrade. They're probably 6-6,
7-5, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Somewhere in the ballpark. Yeah,
I think 7 because then the question, well, who's their quarterback?
Maybe that's Keaton stays. Maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know.
And that wouldn't be ideal. But here's the thing that I have to look at: if Caleb Williams is not their quarterback, they probably don't get Jordan Addison. I mean, so it would have been a domino effect, Katie, of things that would have happened that could have made them no better than they were the year before. But he is their quarterback, and he's pretty good. But, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. This year's team should be a little bit better all around, even though they're not going to be as dynamic in a couple spots. But, like, their defense should be better. It's not going to be great by any stretch, but it's going to be better. It can't be worse than last year's defense.
It's definitely going to be better. It's definitely going to be better.
Yeah, probably 6-6, 7-5, depending on who their quarterback would have been.
Because I mean, they probably would have.
Jackson Dart stay? Seriously, Jackson Dart probably stays if Caleb Williams doesn't come, and he's okay. He could have probably let him do a 6-6, 7-5 record, but they don't. You got to keep in mind if there's no Caleb Williams, there's probably no Mario Williams, and there's probably no Jordan Addison as well. But
yeah.
If you assume that he's the only difference, 7-5, I think, Ryan, that's a fair record. The one that you said, I can live with that. 8-4 at best.
Miller Moss is the quarterback.
No, it probably would have been Jackson Dart or Keaton Slovis.
Or they would have went to the portal for a different guy instead of Caleb. Right. Like, who knows? Yeah.
Right. So, yeah. We'll see how it plays out, no doubt. All right, let's go. Irish Gordian Knot with some interesting takes today.
And this one is Notre Dame's quarterbacks seem to get injured more than other schools. Bayless is great, but I'm worried that the quarterbacks might need more special care leading into and during the season.
Look, you always have to look at injuries and study them as a football staff. You do. And if you're in a situation where you have a lot of shoulder injuries, a lot of back injuries, a lot of knee, if there's like certain injuries that you're seeing a lot of, first thing you look at is you sit down with your medical staff and say, what could be the cause of this? Right. And they evaluate the strength conditioning program. They evaluate your practice schedule. They evaluate all the things that could be leading to those. Hey, a lot of foot injuries. Okay, what surface are we practicing on? That can lead to it. What shoes are we wearing? There's always things that you need to study. You should always be on top. If you're a team that has like 5 or 6 Achilles injuries over the course of a couple of years, there's something going on in yours. That's too rare of an injury for that to be happening that frequently. So that's always something you need to study. The thing that I would say at quarterback is the reason I don't think it's an issue is because it's number one, I don't necessarily agree with the premise that it's more than other teams. Yeah. Jack Cohn, I don't think ever was hurt to the point where he couldn't play, in my opinion. Tyler Buckner was last year, but that was kind of a fluky thing that if you've ever played quarterback, that's your greatest fear. Your greatest fear is getting slammed from behind. That's all. There's 2 fears that a quarterback has. Number one is that I'm tackled from behind and I can't brace myself for impact. Yeah. And I get thrown on the biggest fear that you have as a quarterback.
Or your head hits the ground or something.
See, that's just more of a concussion. And like I had that happen to me in a game. And I mean, I played the rest of the game and threw a touchdown pass after that. You know what I mean? Like I know that today you can't do that, but it's not like a thing where you're out for the rest of the year. Like your shoulder getting popped. You're correct, right? And that's a concern. But I'm talking about like for the long-term injury. The other one is you're planting a throw and somebody rolls up under your knee that you don't see coming. Those are the two biggest fears the quarterback has.
Carson Palmer during his second year with the Cincinnati Bengals.
The only Tom Brady injury he ever had was something like that, where a guy he was planted and the guy dove into his knee. Joe Theismann's career ended on a play like that,
Yeah.
So those are the ones you fear where you can't protect yourself or your leg is planted. Outside of that, the rest of that stuff is it's just luck. It's bad luck. Yeah. Malik Zaires injury was bad luck. Thank you. It just was bad timing. It was just got rolled up on. That's not anything related to the strength and conditioning program. It's not anything related to the equipment, nothing related to the medical stuff. Deshaun Kaiser never got hurt. Ian Book missed one game his first year as a starter because he broke his ribs.
He was a really durable kid.
Very durable quarterback.
Kid in the world. Yeah.
Yes. And honestly, I wonder if Ian could have played if Notre Dame was playing like Michigan the next week. I wouldn't have been shocked if they would have given him a shot, put extra padding on his ribs, and thrown him out there and Ian would have played. But you're playing a not very good Florida State team, and you had Brandon Wimbush, who led you to 10 wins the year before. So you didn't need to play. You didn't need to risk it with Ian at that point in time. He never missed a meaningful down because of injury, I don't believe. I'm trying to think on top of my head, Ryan, and I can't think of a time where Ian never had to come off the field again because of an injury. I mean, he's very durable.
Yeah.
And, so I mean, Phil Dracovich's gotten hurt a bunch at Boston College. He never got hurt at Notre Dame in 2 years. And, Everett Golson never had an injury that cost him time. Everett missed a game in 2012 because of a concussion. To Ryan's point, it was a concussion. He didn't get injured. It was a concussion, and they wouldn't clear him. Tommy Rees never missed a game. He had to come out of a game once because he got hurt against USC, but that stuff happens all the time.
Yeah.
Dane Christ is really Dane and Malik are the only two big injuries that Notre Dame's had a quarterback since Brian Kelly arrived. And Dane's injury was a torn ACL. Like it just got, just the way he got hit against Tulsa. So I don't know that I necessarily agree with the premise. I mean, Tyler Buckner got hurt in the spring game walking downstairs.
Right.
Like that's just bad luck, in my opinion. Drew Pine did not get injured last year. So I don't know that I necessarily accept the premise. To me, I think you sometimes can overdo taking care of your quarterbacks to the point where they're just not prepared for the physicality of the game of football. That's a problem.
I think it's a really underrated aspect of playing quarterback that there's some guys that know how to protect themselves really well. Mm-hmm. It's like Russell Wilson's a small quarterback, but until 2 years ago, he had never gotten injured at all from his college to his NFL career because he understands how to protect himself. Like some guys just have that innate sense of get down, avoid contact. Maybe this is a time to get out of bounds. Like some guys just have that and others don't. So
right.
I really think that's just kind of a innate skill that some quarterbacks have, honestly.
Yeah. And how you play. I mean, there's a reason John Elway got hurt a lot more in his career than Dan Marino and Tom Brady. I mean, Dan Marino's only injury in his career, I believe, I could be wrong, Ryan, was an Achilles. There's nothing you knew about that. John Elway got hurt a lot more. Why? Because John Elway played a far more physical style of football. A run around.
Yeah,
he played hard. And he was a runner. Guys like that are. I think that's something that shortened the career, the time span of dominance for Randall Cunningham. Like Randall Cunningham had 2 careers. He was completely different quarterback in his 2 careers. He had his career with the Eagles, where to me, he was one of the most entertaining, exciting players I've ever seen. Like he wasn't the greatest quarterback.
Dive over the pile. Like he's a high jumper.
I mean, I remember the play where like a guy went at his knees and he like bounces off of it and he like flails and he lands on his feet, gets up and throws it. You're like, what the heck?
They used to call him like an elastic band or something.
Oh my gosh, he was so much fun to watch.
Weird ways.
He was and he had the good receivers back then. He had 2 different. He had Mike Quick early. Then he had like that. What was it? It was Barnett and who was the other receiver he had? Yeah. Fred Barnett, and who was the other guy he had?
Didn't they have Irving Fryer for a little bit? They might have Irving Fryer for a little bit. Maybe
I don't remember him with the Eagles. I remember him with the Jets. I don't remember him with the Eagles. But you could be right. I'm just saying I don't remember. I'm trying to remember who the other receiver was. I want to think it was somebody like named like Calvin or something like that.
Calvin Hill?
I'm gonna have to look this up. and because now it's going to bother me, but it was Fred Barnett's one that you got correct. Let me look at the stats.
He was the one that had like that 99-yard touchdown or whatever it was. It was Fred Barnett.
Yeah. Calvin Williams. That's who it was. Calvin Williams.
I don't know Calvin Williams.
Yeah. Calvin Williams is a nice player for a few years back in the 90s. He was like a nice number 2 kind of guy with the Eagles. He wasn't, Randall's problem too is he played in an era where quarterback play was great. Like right now, I was listening to a show yesterday and the guy was doing like a buy or sell, right? Buy, sell, or hold segment. And it was Aaron Rodgers won't get past the wild card round.
Okay.
And the guy made a point. He's like, well, listen, he's like, think about it. Like if you go to the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL, like all of them are in the AFC except for like Jalen Hurts, right? Yeah. And if I'm being fair or kind or whatever, you could throw Dak Prescott in there. But he's like, so that makes it harder. So you've got to either get a number 1 seed or win a game to get there. And in this era where you look at the talent of the quarterback play in the AFC, it's hard to do that. To get to the Super Bowl in the AFC now is not easy. And it was like that in the 90s in the NFC. Like you had to really earn it to get to the Super Bowl in the NFC in the 90s because of all the teams you had to beat. And Randall just because there's a big gap between like the top group of quarterbacks and everybody else. Back in the late 80s and like early to mid 90s, it was like almost everyone had at least a good quarterback. You know, like guys back then that nobody knows about would be like top 10 quarterbacks, like Neil Lomax, Jim Everett. They'd be like top 10 quarterbacks in today's NFL. The way that they played, but they were like nobody paid attention because like everybody had. I mean, it was great. It was a golden era of quarterback play, in my opinion. And so, you know, that's kind of part of the conversation as well. So it's it's interesting, but that style of play, it kind of let us just get back to the question, but that style of play is going to lead you to getting hurt more. Tyler Buckner's style of play is going to lead to him being at greater risk of getting hurt than Drew Pines.
Yeah.
Now, Drew Pine's a tough kid. Drew Pine took a lot of hits last year, but most of the hits Drew takes are hits where he can kind of brace himself and prepare for the hit. You know, like
he took a pocket.
Or like he had that big hit against Clemson where he scrambled and picked up the first down, but he saw the hit coming and he could kind of brace for it as he got hit out of bounds. Those are the hits that you can live that. Yeah, they don't hurt as much as people think, right? It's the hits that you don't see coming that are the ones that you get hurt on. Right. And that's the risk. That's more of a risk for a guy like Tyler Buckner than it is for a guy like Sam Hartman or even especially Drew Pine, because they're just not guys that are running a ton. And those are I think that there's been some injury things in Notre Dame that have made me scratch my head a little bit. But I wonder if those are kind of more equipment related than strength and conditioning related. But the quarterback one's not one for me. It's not one for me.
Next question from Kyle Wade, who says, "What's your what is YPP? Am I missing
yards per play?
Yards per play expectation. My apologies. What's your yards per play expectations to show you that the offense is indeed vastly improved when playing the beginning of their schedule versus when they play the back end of the schedule?"
Okay. I mean, look, I don't think you can have a huge drop off, right? Like I'm looking at the last 3 national champions. They all average at least 7 yards of play. I think you've got to be around there for your season average, but you also can't be a team that goes for 10 against Tennessee State, Central Michigan, and Navy and goes for 5 against, USC, because that's what it would be, right? I mean, I'm trying to think, Ryan, like what would it be if it was like that? It would be
because you're always going to be judged based upon what happens in the big games, right? That's why Notre Dame. I mean, that's why we are so critical of Brian Kelly, right? It's like Brian Kelly did a lot of good things in Notre Dame, but in the biggest moments, we know what happened, right? We don't have to relive that. And I mean, I care what the yards per play is against Ohio State this year, Clemson, USC.
So if you go for like 10 a play against Tennessee State, Navy, and Central Michigan, and you only go for 5 a play against Ohio State, Clemson, and USC, you're on the season at 7. In those 6 games, you're at 7.5 yards per play. That's top 5 in the country, if not leading the. Some years it leads the country, but it doesn't matter because you didn't do it in the big games. You know, to me, you need to be able to do it more consistently, and that's how the teams that are competing for championships are over 7, because they may go for like 9 against a team that's not really good, but then they're still going to go for over 6 in the games that matter, right? And that's kind of really where. Where the good teams need to get to. And I think if you look at Georgia, I think Georgia is one of the most efficient teams, and it was one of the most efficient teams in college football the last couple of years, especially last year.
Yeah.
They went for 7.2, which is pretty good, but not insane. And their lowest total of the season was 5.6. That was against Kentucky. And they didn't play well that game. They did not throw the ball for worth a darn in that game. And then after that, their next lowest, Ryan, was like 6.1. That was against Missouri. But in the games that mattered, the big games, they went for 9.2 against Oregon. They went for 7.1 against Florida, 6.2 against Tennessee, 6.7 on the road against a ranked Mississippi State team that had a pretty good defense last year, 7.3 against LSU, 8.9 against Ohio State, and 8.2 against TCU. So they were better in the big games than they were in some of the lower games. Because if you just go through what we just showed, Ryan, their worst outcomes of the season that last year were against Kentucky. These are their 5 worst yards per play games. Kentucky, Missouri, Tennessee, Samford, and Mississippi State.
Samford. That's fine.
Tennessee's the only team on it that was really a big game, and they were still 6.2 per play last year. Right? I mean, think about that. Their second to worst game last year was 6.1 yards per play.
It's amazing.
Do you know what Notre Dame's offense was last year, Ryan?
As a team?
6'8", 5'9".
Oh, that's really bad.
Notre Dame's average was worse than Georgia's second to worst game. They only had one game where they were below 6. Notre Dame was below 6 on the season, right? So
5'9" is really bad, man.
It's
bad. Really bad. That's really
it's
bad.
bad. But when you're a team that only runs the football, that's going to be you have to have efficiency. Efficiency is the way to go on offense. You need to have a level of explosiveness, yes, but you have to be efficient, because I would argue that the 2015 team that finished 6th in the country that year with 7.02 yards per play, the problem that team had is they were explosive, but they weren't efficient. They weren't nearly as efficient as they needed to be. I would argue the same thing in 2017, Ryan, when Notre Dame also had a really good yards per play team. They finished 21st that year at 6.4. The thing about that team is they were actually more efficient running the football than they were throwing the football. They averaged 6.3 yards per rush. They averaged 6.4 yards per play. Usually if a team is averaging 6.3 yards per rush, they're really high in yards per play rank in a national ranking, because you expect your pass game to be around 8, right? And that's kind of where Notre Dame needs to be. They need greater efficiency in the pass game, and which will then create greater efficiency in the run game, in my opinion.
It's crazy.
So you want to be at least 6-7 on the season, but you've got to be around 6 or greater in the big games. That's where you have to be.
Yeah.
And if you really want to be a championship team, those are the games that you thrive. And that's what gives me some encouragement about last year's team, Ryan, or about Notre Dame last year.
Mm-hmm.
As bad as the offense was, it played much better in big games down the stretch than it did early in the season. It was much better against Clemson than it was against Ohio State and Marshall and those teams. And they had some bad turnovers, but they didn't lay an egg against USC. I mean, they moved the ball. They came to play. And then, of course, the offense was second half against South Carolina was really from the second quarter on against South Carolina was excellent.
Yeah.
So they at least started playing better, and I expect them to be even better this season. So that's a good question.
Hopefully Stetson Bennett brings some of that efficiency to the LA Rams now. So
yeah. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. We got a 2-parter here from John A1.
John says, in 2023, is Chris Tyree full-time wide receiver with jet sweep type carries, or does he take reps at both wide receiver and running back, or does he get moved back to running back? And how the offense has been installed, can the wide receiver room lose Tyree to the running back room?
I'd rather it didn't, but it can.
Yes.
And the reason I say it, I'd rather it didn't, and this is a complete 180 for me from where I was during the season. I even said this to somebody close to Chris. I say, look, I flat out wrong on this one. I did not think Chris could be as effective at wide receiver as he was this spring. He was a lot more natural running routes and catching the ball. Now, he still needs to get more effective catching the ball consistently, but he was much more effective catching the ball than I thought he was going to be. He looked a lot more comfortable doing that.
Sure.
And he just brings a skill set that you don't have anywhere else. Now you're having to hope that Caleb Smith can bring that. And that's putting a lot on. Again, what do we say about freshmen, Ryan? If Caleb Smith proves he's good enough to do that, great. But if he's you don't want to have to have him do it because he have to. And then if he's not ready, then you just don't have that skill set. I think it'd be very easy for him to do both if the need arose.
Yep.
To get to your point, they don't need because he knows running back. Chris Tyree would be able to make a pretty smooth transition back to running back if the need arose. If he was playing receiver, they had a couple guys go down, and over the course of the next week in practice, they had to get him ready to play running back. It's riding a bike, dude. You've been playing running back your whole life. It's like riding a bike. Hey, let's make sure that you get your protection, stuff down and that you get your footwork down. And I'm serious. He's ready to play the next week. Receiver, he needs the work is where he needs the work. So I don't think they can afford to lose him because there's just nobody else that can provide that skill set. And now you're in a situation where your freshmen have to play because you can't go past. I mean, if you think about it, you can't go past your top 3 until you get to Matt Salerno and the freshman if you move Chris Tyree. Because it's Tobias, it's Dion, it's Jaden, Salerno, and then the freshman. That's it. If you don't have Tyree there. So I would rather not have to go through that.
I also want to see the creativity with him, man. So I just don't want it to have to be pigeonholed to one spot, or I want him to be able to get some jets, to your question, John. I want to see him get some end arounds. I want to see him in the screen game. I want to see him run some RPO stuff out of the slot. I want to see him motion into the backfield and run some pass game stuff with him in the backfield. I just want to see what you can accomplish with a guy like Chris Tyree, because that just gives you you haven't had a guy like him.
Yeah.
And, you just haven't had too many of those guys. I mean, because they're rare players. I mean, we talk about historically, Brian, you're going to start talking about, I know Rocket was one of those guys back in the day, right? But in recent college football, you're talking about what, the Percy Harvins of the world? That's that type of player. You don't get a lot of those guys usually. It's not many of them.
You're absolutely right about that one, Ryan. Here's a comment from David Lowe. We were talking about the rankings for the top 25. Here was a response that he had. He says, I don't think Washington should be ahead of us. Talking about Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Look, if you're going to say you're going to have Washington behind Notre Dame, I mean, I'm not going to say you're insane, but I think Washington has earned the right to be ahead of Notre Dame. I mean, they lost to UCLA on the road by 8. They lost to Arizona State on the road by a touchdown. They beat Oregon on the road. They beat Oregon State. They beat Texas in a bowl game. They smashed Michigan State, blew out Washington State on the road, and I think Washington State was a team that had been ranked a couple times late in the year as well. They've got one of the best. I mean, if it wasn't for Ohio State, we'd be talking about Washington bringing back the best receiving core in college football, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if it was – I mean, Ohio State's clearly number one. But if it's not for Ohio State, we're talking about Washington, and they've got a quarterback that was incredibly productive. Their running back room is going to be better next year with the transfers they're bringing in than they were last year. They got the Robinson kid from Mississippi State. They got the Ngata kid from Arizona State, plus some recruits that they've brought in. Their offensive line lost Jackson Kirkland, but most of their other good linemen are coming back.
Their best offensive lineman returns, and Roger Rosengarten.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And then defensively, they bring back almost everybody. I mean, Savell Smalls left because he wasn't the guy. I mean, Braylon Trice is one of the best edge rushers in college football coming back next year. So, yep. And look, and their 2 losses were both by a touchdown. I mean, that's a good football team. And I watched them a bunch last year. Now, their defense has got to get better if they're going to be a playoff contender. That's no doubt. But that's an 11-2 football team that beat a team from the Big 12 and beat a team from the Big 10 during the regular season. That's a good football team. I have no problem with them being ranked ahead of Notre Dame, Ryan. You may disagree with that, Ryan. I'm not sure what your stance is on that, but I'm totally fine with them being ahead of Notre Dame.
They earned the right to be high on that list. I would have them probably as a top 6 team coming back, personally.
They were also a team that had a first-year coach. You can't use the whole first-year coach excuse for them either.
And they were able to bring back – I mean, Ryan Grubb almost left this offseason for Alabama, and they were able to retain him.
And Notre Dame reached out to Ryan Grubb as well. They had interest in him as well, and he stayed put. So – yeah, I'm good. I'm good with that. So, and there's other people, VW 804, Washington doesn't belong ahead of us, Brian. I'd be very curious how many of you that think that actually watched Washington play last year. Guys, Notre Dame lost to a 3-9 Pac-12 team. Notre Dame went 0-2 against the Pac-12 last year. Washington went 11-2 last year in the Pac-12. do I think Notre Dame will end the season ahead of Washington? Yes, I do. But there's no justification, in my opinion, for having Washington ahead of Notre Dame. Like I said, if you're going to rank Notre Dame ahead, okay, whatever. Notre Dame's probably got a better roster top to bottom, but I'm not doing it. There's no way I'm going to have Washington. And to your point, Ryan, I think you could argue that Washington has a better argument for being in the top 5 or 6 than they do being behind Notre Dame, in my opinion. So,
because I mean, if we're talking about production, you're bringing back. I mean, to your point, Brian, you're bringing back one of the best quarterbacks in college football last season. You're bringing back not just Jalen McMillan, not just Roma Duns, not just Giles Jackson. You also have the Polk kid coming back at receiver, who was very good for them last year. Roger Rosengarten's coming back. The left tackle who actually filled in for Jackson Kirkland was so good that they had put Jackson Kirkland in at guard when he came back from his injury last year. Braylon Trice, to your point, is one of the best defensive linemen in college football. They also have number 48, who I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name. I'm just not going to try. The linebacker, he is coming back. He's been playing for a long time for Washington. So there's some dudes back, man. There's some dudes.
Yeah, that's a good football team. Let's get to some more here, Ryan. Here we go. Here's from Michael Johnson.
With the teams on our schedule, which team has the best defense on paper? On paper. So
on paper, it's Ohio State, because apparently Ohio State has like 9 guys that are first round. I'm serious. I saw this, Ryan. You and I were talking. I was laughing. I'm going to have an article coming out probably later today that goes over just mock drafts and just having some fun with. Because like 2024 mock drafts for me, I was actually just contemplating being a jerk, because Ryan's always being sarcastic with me and trying to push my buttons. So I was actually thinking about having today's show be, we're going to look at 2024 mock drafts, just to watch Ryan sit in agony the entire show.
I would have been sick today.
You'd have. Ryan would have pulled a hammy before today's show.
Sorry, I'm hurling here, man.
Jules is sick, man. The daughter. Exactly. Sorry, buddy. I can't help it. But in all seriousness, they're just fun. They're entertaining. They're not something I take seriously. They're just entertaining for me. But I looked to probably about 15 mock drafts. Most of them like reputable-ish places, USA Today, CBS, all that stuff. And 12 different Ohio State players were mocked as a first-round pick by at least one of those places. And I'm thinking a lot of them were on defense. And I'm thinking to myself, why wasn't their defense better if they have that many NFL guys? And I kind of feel like Jack Sawyer's on every one. JT is on every one. Denzel Burke, Michael Hall, Josh Proctor, Lathan Ransom. There's 6 off the top of my head right there. And I'm just thinking, like, based on what? But so it's what it is, it's based off reputation and recruiting rankings.
Yeah.
Jack Sawyer's considered a potential first-round pick. Why? Because he's got talent and he was a 5-star recruit. Now, there's nothing about his game right now or his production that should make anyone think that he's a first-round draft pick. The guy had 6.5 tackles for loss and 4.5 sacks last year. He has 7.5 sacks for his entire career. Now, could he be a first-round pick? Sure, he's a talented guy. But it's all off of production. I mean, at least JT had 11 tackles for loss last year.
Yeah,
I mean, look, Jack Sawyer didn't even have more tackles for loss than flipping Zach Harrison. Right. I mean,
and Zach just went in the 3rd round.
Right. So, exactly. And he's pretty dang toolsy himself. So, I just kind of feel like I just need to see a little something more from him before I'm going to buy into the hype. He had 1 more sack than last year than Javonte Jean-Baptiste. 1 more. That's it.
And the same amount as Jordan Botelho.
Yeah. So, and way more snaps than Javonte had. So could he do it? Sure. But again, to Michael's question, on paper, sure, Ohio State. I mean,
they do have a lot of talent, but to your point, it's just not proven production at this point.
No.
Yeah.
No. And there are holes.
It's talent.
I think some of their talent at some spots is overrated. I think their secondary talent's overrated. When people talk to me about Lathan Ransom and Josh Proctor being first-round draft picks, I'm like, come on, man. Like,
Josh Proctor's never going to be a first-round draft.
No. Denzel Burke. I've seen people have Denzel Burke borderline top 10, and I'm thinking, based on what?
It's freshman year.
It's not based on his film. It's freshman year until when? Until they played Michigan. Yeah. The first good team that he had to play against really all year, because Penn State wasn't very good that year. And Michigan torched him, beat him for a long play where the guy, because this is what's funny. He never gave up a touchdown. You guys did see him give up a 50-yard bomb where he tackled the guy at the half-yard line against Michigan, right? Like, let's not get too excited about the never gave up a touchdown thing, okay? And then what did he do after he got beat down? He got a call for like 3 pass interference penalties because every time he get burned, he just grabbed the guy. Okay, sure, he never got burned. I just don't get the. Now, he could end up being a great player. I'm just saying right now, there's no film that makes me think him or Jack Sawyer are first-round picks. And there's definitely no film that makes me think Josh Proctor's a first-round pick. And Lathan Ransom is a good football player, but first-round pick?
Wasn't Josh Proctor hurt all last year too? Like
he played, but he's been hurt a lot in his career.
Yeah.
But I look, I get the love for the lineman. For Michael Hall, I get that. I've seen people having the top 10. That's a little high for me right now, but I'm okay. I'm good with that. Yeah. He had pretty good production last year. And for an interior guy, he had really good production last year, in my opinion. But he led the team in sacks. He was borderline double digit. He had 7.5 tackles for loss, only played 12 games. He's a good football player. Dominated Notre Dame. That's for darn sure. Yes, you want to have JT. JT's big kid, athletic, productive, right? Had 11 tackles for loss. Because here's the thing I could justify with JT. He's a dominant run defender, in my opinion. He's not a great pass rusher yet. Good pass rusher. But he was a dominant run defender. He has the kind of run game, pass game, disruptive numbers I crave for the field end position. 11 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. That's a lot of run game disruptive number production right there, Ryan. That I can live with. Okay, cool. Your team needs a power end. You want to look at JT, big, physical, athletic, sure. I just have never gotten the Jack Sawyer infatuation that people have. Same with Denzel Burke.
Yeah,
I don't get
it. It's just the recruiting stuff. And I mean, Sawyer looks like $1 million, but again, it just hasn't happened yet.
Right. He's got to play. I would say Ohio State. Who would be number 2 after Ohio State on paper?
Clemson, I guess, right? I mean,
Clemson is in the conversation. I would actually argue that NC State might be in the conversation because of they've got some players coming back, and their defense was pretty good last year. It really was. They did
lose a decent amount, though. They lost a decent amount.
Yeah.
Both inside linebackers and Durden, and
so did Clemson.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, they still have Rook coming back, Tyler Davis, Barrett Carter.
Right.
There's still some dudes coming back.
Right. I get that. But my only point is Clemson lost 2 first-round picks on the defensive line. And then KJ Henry so they lost 3 starters from their defensive line. They lost their most highly coveted linebacker, although I would argue he was not their best linebacker last year. I think you would agree with me on that Barrett Carter was their best linebacker last year.
Yeah.
Trenton got the reputation, but Barrett Carter was their best linebacker last year.
Most impactful for sure. Yeah.
And I still don't love their I still don't love where I see their secondary. I still think needs to prove a lot to me.
Yeah.
So that would be where I would go for that one. Anyone else that you really look at and thinks has a really good defense slated to come back? I mean, Louisville doesn't. They lost.
Not on that level. I mean, I think Duke will be solid, but I don't think there'll be a.
That guy Jamion Franklin comes back for Duke next year.
He does, man. He does.
Yeah, I love that kid. Yeah, he's done well.
He's done well nose tackle for them. They actually have a 3-tech named Dwayne Carter, who's a good football player.
I remember him. He was an Ohio kid too. He was a Pickering 10 Central kid, I believe, wasn't he?
I think he had double-digit
Cincinnati
tackles for loss. Yeah, I think he had double-digit tackles for loss last year. Man, he was good.
Yeah,
we lost Shaka Hayward though, but
I think that's the kid I'm talking about, Dwayne Carter. Yeah, from Pickerington. Yeah, I remember him.
Yeah,
Notre Dame tried to get in on him late. So yeah, good for him. Good for him. Wade Garrett is up next, Ryan.
Wade says, when it comes to discussing competing for championships, how much do you weigh coaching in that? Marcus Freeman obviously has less experience than the coaches of Ohio State, Bama, Clemson, USC, etc.
Well,
I mean, it's in the conversation of like the overarching Wade.
Sure.
I think in today's conversation, we mostly stuck to the players, right? Returning production and kind of upside of the players. But I mean, Brian, you even mentioned like the linebacker conversation has to include Al Golden in there, right? Because that's a part of the development. So I think it definitely matters.
For me, I look that like Lincoln. I mean, Kirby Smart took Georgia to the title game his second year at Georgia, right? Like Ryan Day went to the playoffs. Each of his first 2 seasons at Ohio State.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it just doesn't. It's not something I just dismiss, but I feel like, look, is he a talented guy or not? Is he a guy that you believe in or not? And I do at this point in time. He hasn't given me a reason not to. And I think last year, Ryan, when I looked at how that team was on the verge of basically just needing to quit, basically, after the Stanford game, where it's just like this team is in trouble.
Yeah,
this team is really in trouble, and to see how they responded, I was very impressed by, and that's from coaching, right? I look at the hires he's made; it's been pretty good.
Yep.
So experience matters. I mean, Lincoln Riley went to the play. Actually, matter of fact, Lincoln Riley's has had fewer playoff appearances the deeper he gets into his coaching career, because his first year was 2017. If I remember correctly. What was Lincoln Riley's first year? It was 2017, or I believe it was 2017.
Sounds
Let me just go look that up, because he was their offensive coordinator. 2017. So in Lincoln Riley's career, his first 3 years, he went playoff, and then his 4th year, he didn't make the playoff, I don't believe, right? Mm-hmm. He goes to the Sugar Bowl or Cotton Bowl, beats Florida. His 5th year, he doesn't make the playoff, and his 6th year doesn't make the playoff. So he had more playoff appearances his first 3 years than he has since. So just going off track record, if you got the chops, you got the chops, right? And you're also, what are you building off of? And so that's why it matters, but it's just not something that I think is the end all be all. Do you have faith in this staff or not? And that's really where it comes down to. But to Ryan's point, this conversation was about, does your roster, because I don't care who your coaches are, right? There's a phrase that I hate. I hate it. It's not the X's and O's, it's the Jimmies and the Joes. I hate that phrase because it's bullcrap. And it, to me, you can't be a champion without Jimmies and Joes. True. But how many poorly coached national champions have you seen in college football? I've seen one. That was Miami back in 2001. That's it. Right? Larry Coker was a terrible coach. But it didn't matter. That team was so incredibly loaded.
Yeah.
But we've seen teams that have the Jimmies and the Joes. If it's about the Jimmies and the Joes, then why does Ohio State not have 3 national titles in the last 10 years? There's been at least 3 times Ohio State had 2015, there was not a better roster in college football than Ohio State's. And I would say it's not really that close, in my opinion. Would you agree with that, Ryan? That team was stupid good.
It was loaded.
And so, but they didn't win they got beat by Michigan State. Why? Because it's about both. It's the X's and the O's and the Jimmies and the Joes, and also about your team culture and your team chemistry and all. It's a too simplistic conversation that really just doesn't hold up. And if it was about the team with the best roster, Bama would have even more titles than they have.
It's true.
And they wouldn't lose any. They wouldn't ever lose, except when they play maybe Georgia and Ohio State. That's it. So I hate that phrase. But to your point, coaching matters, right? Just today the focus was, as Ryan said, more on just what's the talent look like? Because again, I don't care how good your coaching is. If Nick Saban had a UAB's roster every year, guess what? He has 0 championships. None. Now that UAB team was to be as good as they could possibly be, but they wouldn't be a champion because you need both, in my opinion. No doubt. This is an interesting question.
Insulting UAB like that, man.
Hey, you know what? Truth hurts sometimes.
Yes.
Here's a very interesting one for me and Johnson, Ryan.
Would you say that Notre Dame and Clemson have a rivalry?
I think so.
I would. Yeah, I would.
Yeah, I think so.
I was gonna say I would. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good one. I mean, because you're Notre Dame's sort of a de facto ACC team.
There needs to be a back and forth in a rivalry as well. We've seen that now.
Yeah.
Started.
They've played a bunch, right, in recent years. So they played in 15, 18, twice in 20, And then this past year, they've played 5 times in the last 6 years. And they've played in meaningful games, Ryan. They've played in a playoff game. They've played in an ACC title game. And they've had 2 games whose outcome determined whether one of those teams would be able to be a playoff team. Clemson won the first one, which allowed them to – because if Clemson doesn't beat Notre Dame in 2015, if Notre Dame ties that game up at the end and goes into overtime and wins, Clemson's not in the playoff that year in 2015. And then in 2020, if Notre Dame doesn't beat Clemson, they're not in the playoff. You know, because then they'd go to the ACC title game and lose, and now you're not in. And of course, last year, Clemson goes into that South Carolina game with locking up a playoff spot if it's not for the loss to Notre Dame. Right. And honestly, still might have made the playoff if they lost to South Carolina. The way that the end of the season kind of shaped up, Ryan, Clemson still might have got in if they'd have beat North Carolina. I don't think they would have deserved it, but they still might have got in at 12-1. The loss to Notre Dame knocked them out. So they've played every single game they've played in the last 5 times they've played have all been meaningful. There's all been something big on the line. That's and a true rivalry. A true new rivalry, Ryan. Michigan and Ohio State's always a rivalry, no matter how much Ohio State dominates over the course of a decade. It's still a rivalry because there's emotion involved. This is more like a Miami-Notre Dame rivalry, that it's kind of spawned up from a lot of recent meetings between 2 really good teams, that every time you play, there's something big on the line. And that's what was so great about that 88-91, or 90, like 87-90 stretch. I've said this before from what was it, 87, 88, 89, 90. And in those 4 years, Miami won 2 national titles. The 2 years they didn't win it, 88 and 90. Do you know what happened in those 2 years? They lost to Notre Dame both times, right? So there was no other reason for them to have a rivalry other than that, but it came from great games, and where every single game that's played there's something big on the line. Yeah. Right. And that's what Clemson and Miami is, or Clemson and Notre Dame has been. And I think there's a respect between the 2 programs as well.
I think so too. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's, I would call it a rivalry. Is it like Notre Dame?
It's a healthy rivalry. Yeah, it's not like a hostile rivalry.
Yeah.
It's not like you hate Michigan's guts, right? Like you don't hate Clemson's guts. They're a good team, and you want to play well against them, and they've beaten you a couple times. You've beaten them a couple times. Like that's
and they've won the ones that mattered. And now this year, I think there's going to be a chance for Notre Dame to finally win one that really matters. I think that Clemson November game is going to be huge.
I think so too.
Absolutely huge.
From Katie Keevers, his thoughts on the safety prospect Marquise Gallegos. He is still on the board for Notre Dame.
Is he still on the board for Notre Dame? Yes-ish. Katie, I think he's still on the board. I just think there's probably a lot of other guys ahead of him, and I don't know how. He's obviously interested enough to visit, which he did. Yeah. I just don't know if that's one that's either side is necessarily in love with the other at this point in time.
He's a good player, in my opinion. I'm not like I'm not over the moon with him. Like he's just Katie. He's like a 6 foot, 6'1", 165, 170 pound safety. He does work from depth pretty well. I think that he has pretty good eyes. He had a lot of ball production last year. I think he had like 90 something tackles, 7 interceptions, and I think he had like 250 yards of interception return yardage. Like he's a good player. I think there's more. I think there's just more upside on the board than Marquise. Like, I just think he's a good football player. I just don't, I think there might be limitations as far as like the upside compared to some other guys on the board, in my opinion.
My stance, I think I said it yesterday, Ryan, you can't take him once you got Kennedy Urlacher. Like, it was one or the other. I like Kennedy better. You can't have both of them in the same. It's kind of like the Cole Sullivan, Bodie Cahoon conversation. They're both good, solid football players. I like Bodie a lot more than Cole, but I'm just saying if we're gonna just let's say you're right on Cole Sullivan, Ryan, and you're more right on him than I am. Okay, they're both good football players. You just can't take both if you're trying to win a title, and that's how I feel about Kennedy Urlacher and Marquise Gallegos. They're both good football players. You can't take both of them. You got to take one of them and then shoot for even better with the rest of your class, and that's kind of how I feel about that. So I'm I personally would have moved on. I don't know that Notre Dame has. I'm just giving you my opinion on that particular one.
Next question from It Ain't Rocket Science. What is Jack and the Notre Dame administration waiting on in regards to pay raises for super assistants, Mike Mickens and Chancey Stuckey? Do we need to take up a collective as fans, or?
Look, man, here's the deal. The way that Jack Swarbrick operates when it comes to assistant coaches, he doesn't give them pay raises, any meaningful pay raises, unless he has to, right? So when Chris O'Leary got pursued by the Colts, now keep in mind, I still think Chris O'Leary leaves, but it was then that they offered to pay him more, right? Like, well, why didn't you just get on that beforehand and kind of lock him up? Now maybe he still leaves, right? You shouldn't have to wait for Chancey Stuckey to interview somewhere, or Mike Mickens to interview somewhere, or Dylan McCullough to interview somewhere to give them pay raises. You need to be
you meant
proactive.
To say Brian, you meant to say Brian Mason, I think, by the way. You said Chris
What did
O'Leary.
I say?
You said Chris
Brian
O'Leary.
Mason. Yes, Brian Mason. Sorry. So yes, Brian Mason. You shouldn't have to wait for that. You need to be proactive. When guys do a great job, give them a bonus. I'm sure Jack asks for bonuses all the time, I would imagine. You know what I mean? But and that's something that, look, and your head coach shouldn't have to, manipulate titles to get them pay raises either. I mean, it should be like, hey, this guy produced an All-American. This guy did a great job here. Guy did a great job there. Like, I'd be very curious to see what bonus structures are built into the assistant coaching salaries as well. You produce a, consensus All-American, you get $100,000 pay raise, something like that, right? I mean, I would certainly do something like that. You have one of your players drafted in the first round, you get a $50,000 bonus. I would absolutely have stuff like that built into my contracts. There's no question about it. Kirby Smart has things built. I was told this. I don't know how true this is. This is what I was told by a couple people, that if Georgia finishes with a number 1 ranked recruiting class, that all their assistant coaches get bonuses. So yeah, sure. Have some fun with it. Here's an interesting one from John A1.
John's question is, I'm struggling on feeling good about quarterback. The positive Notre Dame has a starting quarterback who can completely run the offense. The struggle for me is, will he be an elite quarterback in college football and take over a game if Notre Dame needs it versus championship level competition?
I think he can, because I don't think he needs to do it the way that Trevor Lawrence did it in 2019. Is Sam Hartman going to do what Trevor Lawrence did in 2019? No. He's not going to go out there against Ohio State in the playoff and run for 100 yards. I don't see that. But I think there's different types of ways to take over the competition. Mac Jones took over the Notre Dame game with his mind and his accuracy. That's exactly what he did. We have seen that. And I think those are the things that Sam Hartman can do. He can put a team on his shoulder, make throws, put the ball in the tight spots, make reads, make checks, things like that can take over a game. I don't think you have the only way to take over a game. Like Drew Brees could take over a game. Drew Brees never did it with his legs. Not that I remember. It was always with his mind and getting the ball where it needs to go. And hey, we need a play here. I'm going to give this guy a chance to make a play. I'm going to avoid this sack and get the throw off. I think he can make plays in those games. But you've got to have the talent around you, and in order to be that way. And I think that he'll have the talent around him this year. So I understand your question, John, because we've never seen him do that with outside of this year. I mean, I thought that's exactly what he did against Clemson this year, Ryan.
Yeah,
I thought he put that team on his shoulders and just made some ridiculous throws.
That was the best game I've ever seen of him by far. Like, that was his best game I've ever seen. Yeah,
and it was the biggest game of his career. I mean, at Clemson, top 5 team. They
went down pretty early in that game too, and he, his back against the wall, was able to make some big time throws. So,
yeah, that was big time. That was big time. So he's got to show he can do it against Notre Dame, but we've seen him do it at Wake, and so there's no reason to think he won't be able to do it at Notre Dame with a better supporting cast, in my opinion.
Yep, agreed. Next question from We Are Not Marshall. Would it break any hearts if the tight end position only has about 20 catches? I don't need to see 60 plus catches from that group. I mean, 20 catches is nothing. Man.
I mean,
that is dude, a small number.
We got to find a happy medium here, in my opinion. So, yeah, I strongly disagree with that sentiment. It would break my heart if they only had 20 catches from the tight end.
20 catches in 12 football games? That's less than 2 a game. Like, that is insanely low production from a position.
hard pass on that. Yes, I would. My heart would be broken if they only had 20 catches because that would be a problem. I mean, look, you're a pro style team. Tight end has to be a part of what you're doing. Do you know the last time Notre Dame had below? Do you know the last time Notre Dame had below 20 catches from their tight end room? Do you know the last time that happened?
90s, probably 80s.
Last time they had below 20, was in 2016.
Oh, okay. Forget it. I'm wrong.
Well, but think about what that team was. You know what I mean? So no, I'd rather not go there.
Who's the leading tight end that year? Was that Koyak?
Durham Smythe.
Oh, Durham Smythe. Yeah.
Yep. He had 9 catches for 112 yards. And then Nick Wisher had 3 catches for 47 yards. He had 12 catches from the tight end room.
I haven't heard Nick Wisher's name in a few years, man. It's been a while.
Yep. They only had 20 catches from the tight ends the year before in 2015, and that proved problematic. Late in the year in a couple games when the receivers weren't stepping up, the tight ends weren't there to be relied upon.
Yeah.
I mean, they just weren't. They couldn't make plays against Clemson. They didn't make plays against Ohio State, and it hurt your offense. I think a tight end is incredibly important to a pro-style offense. Incredibly. I mean, nobody talks about – Ryan, you have – but how many people talk about the importance of the tight end in the 2019 LSU team? You've talked about it.
Thaddeus Moss,
very important to that team. Yeah. Because he would always make that hey, we're going to do everything we can to take these guys out and crap on 3rd and 5. That's the guy that beat us. Dang it. You know what I mean?
I mean, Thaddeus Moss had
catches.
I was about to say he almost had 50 catches that year.
Yeah. So I'm going to have to disagree with you on that, buddy. I understand where you're coming from. I think that the premise being with the backs out of the backfield and all the receivers, the ball going to get spread around. I just to say, let's find a happy medium. If you meet me in the middle and say 40, I'm good with that. Yeah. I'm good with that. I can live with that because if the ball is being spread around outside, sure, I can live with that. But 20, way too low. Way too low.
Yeah. Well, and Jaden Thomas is a tight end, so
according to ESPN, that's a good point. It's a very
For Benjamin Carchi, who says, "What are your thoughts on NCAA expansion game scheduling? Notre Dame home game in December would be cool to see."
Well, I'm pulling it up. There's some things I don't like about it, and there's some things that I do like about it. Let me pull up the new thing. Right? So first round is going to be on campus games Friday, December 20th. They'll have one game in the evening, and then Saturday, December 21st, they're going to have 3 games. Look, you can't have the reality is if you're playing 4 first round games, you can't have them all in one day. It's not possible. And unless you're going to have a game at like 9 a.m., it's not possible. So Friday night game and then 3 the next day. That sounds like a lot of fun. I would love to have a Notre Dame game because like right now, the way that they just completely have done such a poor job marketing the other bowl games, nobody's watching those bowl games on December 20th and 21st, sadly, except for losers like me and you. So
I'm watching it, man. I'm watching Middle Tennessee in the
I love those bowl games. I absolutely love those bowl games.
Bahamas Breeze Bowl, whatever we got going on.
I dig that. And then the quarter here's where I don't like it. The quarterfinals are on Tuesday, December 31st, and Wednesday, January 1st. And then the semifinals are on Thursday and a Friday because they don't want to have to compete against the NFL playoffs and NFL postseason. I hate that. And then the national championship game is on a Monday.
Yeah.
Look, I understand why they're doing it, but the national championship game should be on a Saturday. If it's not going to be on January 1st like it used to be, then it should be on a Saturday. I'm sorry. It just should. But they don't want to compete against the NFL, I guess. So I'm fine with the first round games in December. And I guess the quarterfinals is just going to be more about, Ryan, just getting them around that New Year's period. So some years it's going to be in the middle of the week. Some years it's going to be later, whatever. It's not that big a deal. But the semifinals being on a Thursday and a Friday, I think is terrible. Absolutely terrible. I think that's a stupid idea. Really stupid idea. And then the national championship game now is going to be January 20th. The first one is going to be January 20th. So the semifinals are the 9th and the 10th, a Thursday and a Friday. Mm-hmm. And then the title game is on a Monday, January 20th. I hate that.
I don't like the Monday championship game stuff either. It's kind of weird to me. It's kind of
and especially since you're now having 35, like Thursday and a Friday game. Yeah, I don't like that at all.
Is college basketball championship? Isn't that always on a Monday too? And I'm just like, this is weird.
The Final Four games is on Saturday, and then the championship game.
Yeah,
but at least it's always kind of been that way. And there's not like a designated. This is the day for. This is the day for basketball games, right? I mean,
I'm still old, so I would still like it to be on a Friday or a Saturday night instead of a Monday night.
But you're not old; you're just old. You know what I mean? Like
I'm an old soul, man.
Yes, you are. You are, but your body's not old. So
tell that to my body.
I know, right? I know. I'm sorry. I'm looking at something here real quick. I just saw something.
You're ignoring me?
No, I'm not ignoring you. I'm looking at something right now.
Lucky lefty listeners. No,
don't do it. I don't want you to slip up or something. I just saw a list, and I'm actually going to go look at something here real quick that I thought was funny. I just want to see this here real quick. No, okay, I get that. All right, punt returners. I saw a list of top 100 returners in the 21st century, and there was no. The list looked a little ridiculous.
Was it Big Game Boomer? Was it Big Game Boomer?
I didn't even want to say the name. I didn't want to say the name.
Did you see it did a kicker list or something like that since the 2000s? I'm like, why is this a list? And also he had Blake Grupe on there, and he didn't have Tyler Buck. I mean, he didn't have Justin Yoon on there. And I was like, oh, okay, sure.
Whatever. All right, here we go. Andre Tonsel with a question.
Andre says, I believe defense needs to be top 10 to be in the mix for championship. Thoughts? Just defensive line and linebackers are question marks on this team.
Well, I think safety is a question mark. I do.
Yes, it's a major question mark.
I think it's the biggest question mark on defense. Does it need to be top 10? Well, Andre, it depends on Notre Dame's defenses in the past have needed to be top 10. I think the reason that I would say not really is because the way they schedule is a little bit different. So this year, maybe because the way that the schedule is shaped up, but like they're going to play some great offenses this year. It's going to be very hard for Notre Dame to be ranking in the top 10 defensively when you've got to play Ohio State and Clemson and USC and NC State with Robert and I running that offense now. And Duke.
That's why we're a fan of context, man. Right. Everybody's playing the same schedule every year. Yep.
But I mean, you can't get too far outside of the top 10, right? And again, are we talking? What top 10 are we talking about? Are we talking about efficiency? Are we talking about with some of the efficiency numbers taken into context, just your schedule, who you played? Sure, I think you need to be there. But what I was more referring to is more like a scoring defense, yards defense. You need to be a top 15 scoring defense, in my opinion, to be a championship team. But I could rank 14th in scoring defense, and you could rank 7th, and I have a better defense because you played no one and I played really good teams. So it's just about the context, Andre. But does it need to be top 10 if the offense is as good as we think it is, Ryan? I don't think it needs to be top 10. But I will say this, to Andre's point, it can't be that far out of the top 10. It can't be 25, in my opinion. Because as good as the offense, I think the offense will be, it's not going to be LSU 2019 or anything close to that. And that's about the only way you can win a title with a defense that's not in the top 25. Because what was LSU scoring defense in 19? They gave up over 20 points a game. They were like, I thought they 31st.
I was going to say, I was going to guess 29, but yeah.
Yeah, they ranked 31st in scoring defense that year. But they also had one of the most explosive offenses in college football history.
LSU's
they scored 48
defense,
points a game.
LSU's defense was a big question mark going closer to the pro season, but I remember they really got better down the stretch of the season, right. So they were a little bit less of a concern. But early on in that season, LSU's defense was not great. It wasn't great.
Well, is less of a concern. They still weren't great by any stretch. Yeah. I mean, they gave up 614 yards in a November game to Ole Miss.
Yeah.
They gave up 541 yards and 8 yards of play in a November game to Alabama. Part of the reason they got better down the stretch is they played Arkansas and Texas A&M. But they did play where they played a lot better is they played great against Georgia in the SEC title game. And they made key stops against Clemson. Early, Clemson was moving it on them early. But the thing that, what really helped LSU in that game that not a lot of people talk about wasn't their defense and wasn't their offense. Their special teams early in that game was phenomenal. They kept pinning Clemson inside the 10. And Clemson's backed up And that's exactly what Notre Dame did to them in 2018 and why Notre Dame had a chance to go up double digits early in that game. Then that turnover to Ian Book just got them in trouble. Because remember that first drive, they pinned Clemson back and forced an early deep punt. And they got the ball at midfield, and that's when you had to fumble by Ian Book.
Was that who's the punter? Jay Bramlett, or was that Tyler Newsome at that point?
I believe it was Newsome. Let me, because that was 2018. I believe it was Newsome, but I could be wrong on that. Let me just go look here real quick. Ryan, punting. It was Tyler Newsome. Yeah, it was his last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good punter,
man. Yeah. Had a great leg. Didn't always know how to control it, but man, when he got a hold of one, it was going to go.
Yes.
Here's one, Ryan. I'm going to read because I want you to answer it. From Mike Sullivan. Who's the national championship game MVP? Tyler Buckner or Sam Hartman?
Well, I hope it's Sam Hartman. Yeah. I hope it's
neither.
Sam Hartman, man. Wouldn't it be wild if we had a Tyler Buckner, Sam Hartman national championship game? That would be pretty wild, man.
That would be could you imagine the ratings for that game? The storylines in that game? Are you kidding me?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
But let's hope it's Sam Hartman in that situation, Mike. Let's hope.
Yeah. Katie said, I despise the championship game being played Monday night, Saturday night, please, like the rest of the season. I agree with her, but you see that picture? Katie's holding a baby. I could imagine with work and having young children that a Monday night game would suck.
Yes.
I would have a feeling it would suck if you're a parent. I can't speak to that. So I sympathize with you. But that's the thing is college football has a day where its games are played. It's so how about you work out deals with the NFL to not have their games on Saturdays? You know what I mean? Why is it always college football has to, to placate to the NFL? Oh, that's right, because it's all about TV. Why are we shortening? Why are we doing things to shorten games? Because it's TV. Here's a simple fix to games being too long. Don't have TV timeouts as long. Have a shorter halftime, like every other level of football, right? Don't make take a minute off of every commercial break. Why don't you do that? Oh, well, can't do that. Why? Because
somebody's paying for that spot.
We're only here to
make
money. Okay, at least be honest about it. Don't talk to me about shortening games and fewer plays. Blah 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 blah. I don't want to hear it. It's about money.
Speaking to your point, though, as a person with a young child and another one coming, you'll never get to see the start of a game ever again. So you'll always be a couple minutes late.
Oh, goodness gracious.
I wanted to watch a little bit of the Sixers game last night, and I didn't get to even look at any of it until probably about 10 minutes into that game. Luckily, because the Sixers were terrible last night. So,
yeah. Yes. Did they lost last night?
Oh, they got smoked, man. They lost by like 40 last night to the Celtics after winning game 1.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
Gotcha. Interesting. Somebody said something about somebody said Luke Talix was put on scholarship at safety. I haven't seen anything about that, so I can't comment on that. So Ryan, if you could reach out to him, I'm not going to comment on that until we get confirmation that actually happened. Now here's an interesting one, Ryan. This is from Archer452. He says Ohio State's 3 recent teams that were championship caliber but didn't win: 2015, 2019, and 2022. Man, it sure would have been nice to have 3 more trophies in that cabinet. I don't know that I would. This is going to sound crazy because if they'd have beat Georgia, they'd have won a title. But I don't think this Ohio State team was necessarily a championship caliber. The only reason they were even in the Georgia game, in my opinion, was because C.J. Stroud was like Superman in that game. Like, he played out of his mind. I thought Stetson stunk early in that game, and Ohio State still couldn't win. But I mean, you can't say they got to the playoff and lost by a point. So, and if they'd have beat Georgia, they probably beat TCU. Although I don't think it's a given that they'd have beat TCU just because the matchup. I think TCU would have scored on Ohio State. I mean, they just scored 51 on a team that's dominated Ohio State the last 2 years. So,
is that good?
It's pretty good. But the 2019 team, yeah, I'll give you that one. That was a really good team. But championship. But they're not. Here's the thing. There's nobody who was going to beat LSU that year in the postseason. Nobody.
Yeah.
And I'll say this. I think that Ohio State's defense would have matched up better against LSU's offense than Clemson's defense that year.
I agree. It would have been a more competitive game without question. Yeah.
But Ohio State's offense wouldn't have been able to move the ball. They couldn't move the ball on Clemson, right? If they'd have fallen behind, that was an Ohio State offense that scored a lot of points that year, but I always felt like they kind of – it was how do I say this? I'm trying to be kind and not be too extreme with my comment because it's every time I say this, it sounds a lot harsher. They padded their stats against a lot of crap teams on their schedule. It's the moral of the story. They didn't play great on offense against Wisconsin. If you remember that game, they were trailing Wisconsin at halftime in the Big Ten title game. And they couldn't score on Clemson. And I mean, in that game, I think that the outcome would have been different. It just wouldn't have been as high scoring. They had no shot at beating LSU. With all due respect to Justin Fields, but that defense was pretty good. That defense was really good. So I would definitely put that team in there. And honestly, I'll say something else people are going to take. If the Big Ten was not so stupid during COVID, I'm just going to piss some people off. I don't care. If the Big Ten wasn't stupid during COVID and actually followed the science and had a normal offseason like other teams did, that was going to be a really freaking good Ohio State team in 2020. A really good Ohio State team. But the Big Ten basically got screwed of having any chance to compete because they played 7 games. They hadn't – I mean, 7 games is when you're just now starting to hit your peak in a season, Ryan. Yeah. I mean, it's not time to play for a title. You're just now starting to hit your peak. How many games did Bama play that year? 12? Right? I think Bama
SEC
played 12.
had a full schedule, right?
Yeah. So they went 13-0 that year. They played a full conference schedule. Yeah, 10 regular season games, the SEC title game, and then 2 postseason games. I really thought that Ohio State team, if they would have had a normal offseason, had a chance to be really good in 2020. Really good. But they just never got their shot really to be that team. I mean, that was Olave's junior year. You had Garrett Wilson on the team, Jamison Williams on the team, Jeremy Ruckert on that team. You had Trey Sermon and Master Fields. You had Master Teague, Justin Fields. Their defense wasn't great that year, but it wasn't bad either. It was a good defense. But that offense, if that offense would have had a full offseason, that would have been the best offense Ohio State ever had, in my opinion. Like I really believe that because that team was loaded. But they were just never given a chance by their conference, in my opinion.
I like the name Master Fields. Master Fields.
Master Fields. That's a great name.
Cool name.
Yes.
That's a great name.
It's no one that I know. It's a completely made up name. But this is why I won't say lucky lefty listeners 5 times fast because I'm going to mess it up. I can't even say Master Teague correctly. So, yeah. But anyway, more questions here. Let's move on.
From Jason Rose says, hey, guys, every team has their glue guy, that glue guy. Who was the glue guy on both of Notre Dame's playoff teams?
18, their glue guy on defense they had 2, in my opinion, and it was Drew Tranquil and Alohi Gilman were their glue guys in 2018 on defense.
Alohi's a great one.
Yeah. On offense, I mean, honestly, it's going to sound weird, but they were such a different team when Dexter Williams came back from injury. Now, he wasn't their glue guy in the traditional sense in that he was a leader because he wasn't. But when you plug Dex into that offense, it was a different team. It just was. It was a completely different team. Who was the glue guy on that team? I'll tell you who it was. It was a kid who didn't even play most of the year. It was Alex Bars. Alex Bars got hurt in September against Stanford. What a lot of people don't realize, Alex Bars was doing meetings with offensive linemen, going over film with them. He was coaching them in different ways. He was being a leader to that young offensive line in ways that they don't have the success they have if he doesn't do that. And so he was their glue guy on offense. 2020, the glue guy on offense, Ryan, to me, is Ian Book. I mean, that's where I give Ian Book. Keeping that team together that offseason was tremendous. I mean, he did a tremendous job with that. I mean, I thought that was the most impressive thing he did was as a leader with keeping that team together.
Robert Hainsey seems like he would probably be a glue guy.
Hainsey's part of that too. Yeah. I mean, no, those guys stayed together. They competed. They stayed locked in as much as they could when COVID shut them down twice, sometimes because of what happened with other teams. But remember, they had an outbreak in camp, and it cost them some time at camp. And then they had to cancel that. There was a game that they had to cancel because they had several guys test positive for it during, I think it was before the Florida State game, right? and that team just stayed together. I was impressive by the leadership of that team. I'd say the glue guy on defense, I'd probably have to say Kurt Heinisch, Myron Tagovailoa, those two guys were probably the guys I'd throw into there as far as just those leaders that just kept that team together. That's probably who I would say were the glue guys on those teams. Anyone else? Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was a great player, but I wouldn't necessarily call him like a glue guy. He was just dude.
I think Kurt Heinisch is a really good one. Yeah. That one makes a lot of sense.
All right, let's get to some more as we get closer. We're getting closer to the end here, Ryan.
Ryan S7 Schulte says, how many interior defensive linemen are going to have to produce to make Notre Dame a championship caliber team this year?
All of them. Look, you're going to need anyone that plays to produce. I'm gonna be respectful to the question, because I think where he's coming from with that is like, who needs to be like impact producers, right? Who needs to be guys that can kind of do it consistently? I'm being a little bit sarcastic with the all of them. If you're playing, you got to produce. But to your question, Ryan, I think it's a very good question. And here's
great name, by the way. Great name.
Yes, Schulte is a great name. Yes. So when you need Jordan Botelho or another Viper. If I don't care who it is, you need one of your Vipers needs to be a legit pass rusher, at least one.
Yep.
You need Riley Mills, in my opinion, to be he needs to not fall into the Jason Adamiola trap of you get disruptions, but you never make plays on the ball.
Mills
He's got to make plays on the ball.
He's got to be a dude. Yeah.
And then I would argue another guy. So to me, that would make you a very good defense. Here's the secret sauce. The secret sauce is twofold. One is you need a guy coming off the bench that's disruptive. An Onye, you need that guy. Won't have the big numbers, Ryan, but just that disruptive off the bench guy up the middle.
Yeah.
And then the last piece of this is Javonte Jean-Baptiste. Because we're talking about championship, right? We're talking about championship, not just good, but championship. Yep. If you can get pass rushing production from both end spots, this was the difference between the 2018 teams and the 20 and 21 defenses. The 2018 team, they could rush the passer from everywhere. 3 technique, big end, Viper, all of them, right? And this team, the 2020 team, the 2021 team had one guy that could really consistently rush the quarterback. That's it. And if you could stop Isaiah Foskey, you stopped Notre Dame's pass rush. Now, that was much harder to do than, it's easy to say, hard to do in 2021, which I thought was Isaiah Foskey's best year as a pass rusher by far was that season, because there was a consistency to him, right? And I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Yeah.
But if you can get pass rushing production from both ends, that makes you very hard to stop in those big games. Because what are we talking about, right? We're talking about Ohio State, Clemson. Right. Ohio State was able to shut down Isaiah Foskey last year. And once you did that, Notre Dame's pass rush was dead.
It was dead, yeah.
Right? And, now it's like if you got to stop one guy and that's it, then you're in trouble. If you've got to stop multiple guys, that's when hey, we shut down Jordan Botelho. Yeah, but because you kept sliding your protection to him, which meant, your big end, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, was killing your other tackle in one-on-ones, or you kept sliding there and Riley Mills was whooping your guards' butts or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to need that other secondary production. And that's true everywhere, Ryan. Like, you can't just have one dude. Because I can take one, if I'm a great team too, I can take one dude out of the game. Right? I thought that Ohio State did a pretty good job, in my opinion, of making sure that Brock Bowers didn't kill them in the semifinal game. Would you agree with that? At least early on.
Yeah.
Right? Brock had 4 catches, 64 yards, didn't really take over that game. But that's left them exposed in some other big plays. And so what happened? Other guys went out and made Adonai Mitchell went out and made a big play. Ladd McConkey had some big plays. Other guys stepped up and had made big plays. And that's what you have to be. Right? So you couldn't take Brock Bowers out of the game and say, okay, we took Brock out, we're good. Because somebody else is going to step up and beat you. That's just the way that Georgia team, that's what made them so hard to stop. And none of those guys were great players, but just like, hey, look, okay, you want to take that guy? I can take that guy out. Cool, I'll go step up and make a play. That's what made Clemson so good. You take Mike Williams out, all right, it's fine. Deion Kane's going to go make a big play. Hunter Renfro's going to go make a big play. Artavis Scott's going to convert a 3rd and 4.
Jordan Leggett at tight end.
Yeah, exactly. It's another guy that caught a big pass in that championship game.
Yeah.
Ohio State is that some of their best teams are that way. And you want to take Garrett Wilson out, that's fine. You want to take Chris Olave out too. You want to focus all your attention on our outside guys. Okay, that's fine. Jackson Smith and Jacobs are going to catch 10 passes for 150 yards. I mean, J.K. Dobbins is going to catch a wheel route out of the backfield. That's fine. If you want to do that. And that's what the best teams do. You can't just have a guy making plays at a position. I don't care who it is.
Jeremy Rucker seemed to play his best football in like playoffs and championship games as well.
Yeah.
So, yep.
Yeah. So that's where I'm at. So those three guys are the key. Viper, Mills, and Javonte Jean-Baptiste have at least two of them have to be good every game, every big game, at least two of them. And that's where I'm at on that one, Ryan.
I love saying Javonte Jean-Baptiste, by the way.
Javonte Jean-Baptiste.
It's a great name, man. Great name.
Here's an interesting one, Ryan, from Archer 452. I'm going to read this because I want you to answer it first, because it comes from the question earlier. We talked about what would USC have been without Caleb Williams. And Archer 452 says, what would Bama have been without Bryce Young? I say 7-5. What say you, Ryan? I have a very strong opinion on this.
I think 7-5 is way too low. I mean, Archer, I would say like 9-3, something like that. Like they definitely wouldn't be a great team because, I mean, we talked about it. I think that was one of Alabama's worst teams over the last few years. I mean, it was definitely depleted of talent at certain spots, and wide receiver specifically is one, right? But I mean, offensive line wise, you still had a good offensive line this year. You still had some guys on defense that are still really good players. I think that you could have gutted out some games, and it would have been maybe a little bit uglier some of the football games you win, but I still think you go 9-3. I love Bryce, though. I think Bryce is a great player. He did a lot with some struggling players this year, in my opinion, at times, but I still think you go 9-3, man. It's Nick Saban at the end of the day. Like, they're not going to be a terrible team, you know? Like, they're just not going to be.
Because my question is, Ryan, who would they have lost to without him?
Right.
Are they going to lose to Utah? So they're going to still lose the two games they lost.
Yep.
So then Utah State, no. Texas, maybe. But Bryce didn't play very well that game. He was terrible that game. He had 5.5 yards per attempt that game. That was one of the worst games of Bryce Young's career. He went 27 of 39 for 213 yards in that game.
Yeah.
Not a very good game. They're not losing to Louisiana Monroe. They're not losing to Vanderbilt. They actually literally lost him against Arkansas, and they were losing, I believe, when he got hurt, or the possession after he got hurt. And they ended up winning by 20-something points because Jalen Milroe went off in the second half as a runner. Then they played the next week against Texas A&M without him and won. Lost to Tennessee. They still beat Mississippi State without him. They still lose to LSU. They beat Austin Peay. They beat Auburn. The only other potential game is you'd have to lose to Ole Miss and Texas and then one of those other teams to be 7-5, and I just don't see it. Here, and I'm going to say something else. Here's a hot take for me. I think Bama's offense this year is going to be better than it was last year. Do you want to know why? Not because of the offensive coordinator per se or the quarterback position, because Bama has become so dependent upon the quarterback and has gone away from their identity. I think that this year, Ryan, we're going to see them run the football a lot more this year. And that's truly Bama football. Because the way I look at it is, so Bama really transitioned away from their style of play in what year? 2018, right? That's when they transitioned away from it. How many titles have they won in that stretch?
One.
And it was during the COVID year.
Yep.
Where they were a very experienced team. The reason that I believe is because they have gone away from Georgia is the new Bama. Georgia's doing right now what Bama did to win them all but one of Nick Saban's titles. Great defense, power football, efficient, big play pass game. That's Bama football. And I think that the issues of quarterback this year are going to force them to be more of we got to rely on the run game. And what would have happened last year if Bryce got hurt? Let's say Bryce got hurt against Utah State and he's out for the year. That would have forced them to rely more on the offensive line in the run game. And I think they'd have been just fine. Now, they wouldn't have been as productive points per game and all that kind of stuff, but they'd have been a much more efficient offense, and they still would have lost to the teams they lost to. But I think you could argue that they may not have lost to LSU if they were Bama football, right? So they wouldn't have been better than they were with Bryce. I'm just saying I think that if Bryce would have played on an offense that was run correctly, it would have made him even better because he wouldn't have had to carry the load all the stinking time like he did. and that's something that I think would have changed. I actually think they're going to have a chance to be. They may not score as many points as they did last year, but they're going to be a more efficient offense this year than they were last year, simply because they can't rely on Bryce anymore. They're going to have to rely on their offensive line more, and I think that's going to be a good thing for Alabama. Now, we'll see if the offensive coordinator and quarterback can keep, they've got to still be good, but I think I think the recipe for Bama this year is going to look a lot more like it did in the past. We got to play good defense, and we got to be better. Now, the question is how good is their coaching going to be? Because we'll see how the offensive coordinator hire works out. I thought the Kevin Steele hire was awful. Like, I literally didn't think they could have a downgrade from Pete Golding, and then he hired Kevin Steele. And I was like, wow, okay.
I don't know if that's a downgrade from Pete Golding, though.
I think Kevin Steele is terrible. I think he's awful.
Pete Golding was pretty bad himself.
Did you see the Miami he was, but did you see the Miami defense last year? Kevin Steele gets hired for one reason and one reason only, to recruit. And then he helps build up your roster, and then he leaves, and you bring in a real defensive coordinator. It's exactly what happened to Clemson. Kevin Steele was the guy that oversaw the 70-33 debacle in the Orange Bowl. He gets fired, but he did a good job recruiting. They bring in Brent Venables, who's a much better coach, and all of a sudden their defense gets better. It's not a coincidence. He is, I think, the only worst defensive coordinator Auburn's ever had is Brian Van Gorder. It's the only guy that's been worse at Auburn than Kevin Steele was. But yeah, it's not good. That was a bad hire. It's a really bad hire. Speaking of D coordinators, this is an interesting question, Ryan.
From Andrew Burke, who says, with all due respect to Al Golden, how much more confidence would you be winning a title with Mike Elko as the defensive coordinator? I mean, substantial. Yeah, because he's a proven commodity. Yeah. Like, I know who Mike Elko is. He's a really good college coach. He's a really good college defensive coordinator. Al Golden, the jury's still out, because literally before this past year, we hadn't seen him be a defensive coordinator since 2004, right? Like something like that, like some crazy number like that. So, I mean, Mike Elko is a known commodity, and we've also seen it at Notre Dame, where Mike Elko can turn things around pretty quickly as far as how good a defense is. So, substantially more.
You left something out, Ryan. You know what else Mike Elko was really good at?
Coaching.
Recruiting.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Could you imagine Mike Elko and Marcus Freeman? Like, let's just say hypothetically that Mike Elko didn't get the Duke job, and he just was so ready to be done with Texas A&M that he's like, you know what? Loved my time in South Bend. My kids are a little older. Let me go back to South Bend and work with Marcus Freeman. Could you imagine the recruiting classes on defense that Mike Elko and Marcus Freeman would bring in together? Are you kidding me? That would be nuts. That would be fun. That would make your job a lot more fun, Ryan. I can promise you that. Yeah. I can promise you that. They would recruit at an insanely high level, because he wasn't even here very long. He was a very impactful recruiter.
Yeah.
Very impactful recruiter. That would have been a lot of fun to watch, man. A lot of fun to watch. All right, let's get to the last couple here, Ryan, that we'll get to. Here's one from Timeout Tom. Actually, we do have a super sticker from Shelton Hager. Thank you very, very much, Shelton. I hope that everything went well with your everything with your wife and the new baby. So hopefully, I would imagine since he's giving us a super sticker that everything went well, okay. and your new baby is now good and healthy, and mama's healthy and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully that is the case, Shelton. But here's one from Timeout Tom, Ryan.
Timeout Tom says, considering Jared Parker is an unknown commodity, should Notre Dame limit what you show before the Ohio State game, or show so much that Ohio State has to waste time preparing for it?
Neither. I look, coaches and fans spend way too much time on this, right? Like, way too much time. First of all, you don't ever repeat the same exact game plan and play calling sequence from the previous games. They're going to have you could say, okay, well, don't show a lot. Okay, but then you haven't had a chance to really get game action with your best stuff, and you're going to wait until, Ohio State to do that? Go run. Look, if you are who you think you are as a football team, then just be you and play your game, and then let the chips fall where they may. Coaches spend way too much time, and fans spend way too much time focusing on this. Well, don't show. You got 4 games to play before you play Ohio State. You're going to save your offense until game 5. Now, and Tom, I understand where you're coming from, because there are coaches who think this way.
Yes,
but my thing is
actually,
and don't overdo it either. Run your offense. Get your players to be good at what they do, and then you'll have a unique game plan for Ohio State, and then go execute that game. I mean, that's where I'm at, Ryan. You shouldn't have to be this gimmicky stuff, right, man? Like, I want Sam Hartman to have that offense mastered by game 5. I don't care if Ohio State knows what's coming. You still got to stop it. And get your offense rolling. Let them run the stuff that is your bread and butter. Now, are there a couple wrinkles that you may hold back? That's always true, Ryan. You always hold back wrinkles you don't need to beat the teams that you're playing that you may need to beat another team, but that's called game planning.
Yeah.
We didn't hold it back. We just didn't need it in this game.
You didn't need
right?
it. Yeah. You didn't need the kitchen sink in this football game.
Right. So, but I don't view that as holding back. We're going to get good at, we need to run our foundational stuff. We need to go out there and master our basics and dominate with that. And then we can build on other stuff. But that's part of team development. That's not this intentional holding back stuff that we would otherwise run because we don't want to show Ohio State something. I don't care about all that, man. Just look, Clemson knew what was coming every single snap, and they couldn't do a dang thing about it.
So did Syracuse.
Right. Focus on that, right?
Yeah.
Focus on that, and then you'll be fine.
Be good at what you do, man. Be good at what you do.
Right. Yep. Exactly. All right, and then here's the last one that I see, Ryan, that we have here from Robert Bishop.
Robert says, do you guys think that Tyler Buchner was given some sort of guarantee from Bama and Tommy Rees?
I highly doubt it.
Yeah.
I highly doubt it. And here's the thing. If he was given a guarantee, Nick Saban's not honoring that. That's not how
I was about to say, I'm not sure that's how Nick Saban rolls, right?
Ryan, Nick Saban did not get to 7 national championships because he's got 6 at Bama, right? He won 9, 11, 12, 15, 17, 20, and then 1 at LSU. This guy's got 7 national championships. He didn't win 7 national titles by promising guys stuff they hadn't earned. That's not the culture. And if he did promise them that, then that's the beginning of the end for Alabama. And it has nothing to do with Tommy Rees or Tyler Buchner. It just means Nick Saban is not who he was. That was the downfall of the Jim Tressel era, in my opinion.
Yeah.
He allowed Terrell Pryor to get away with things he would have never allowed any other player to get away with because he felt he needed to cater to this 5-star guy, and he lost the culture, lost the team. And to me, Nick Saban's not going to do that. Now, a guarantee will be you're going to get every opportunity to win a starting job, every opportunity. But I'm also giving Ty Simpson that guarantee as well. Yeah. I'm also going to give Dalen Lonergan that opportunity as well. You're going to have to earn it. You're not going to win. Look, Nick Saban's trying to win a championship. That's all he cares about.
And all due respect to Tommy Rees also, if Nick was to sign off on that, I think it's not going to be from a first-year offensive coordinator that he just hired as well. It's going to be a guy that's been with him longer, that he trusts a little bit more than that to be like, oh, yeah, okay, cool. Never seen this guy, but like, yeah, guarantee it to him. Guarantee.
If Kirby Smart was still his D coordinator and went to him and said, hey, we got to promise this defensive end a starting job to get him, there'd have been like, okay, but you better manage him, right? Yeah.
Yes.
I don't see that.
Trust is built with time, right? Trust is built with time. So especially with a guy that's 70 and like you just said, has 7 national championships, yeah.
Right. There's no way he's promising him that job, in my opinion. Yeah. And I don't think Tommy Rees would make that guarantee. I think the conversation
don't think it would be
like
wise if he did, because that's like putting yourself in a tough situation in case he's not the guy, right? Like that's just tough. It's tough.
I think the conversation went something like this. Look, you know me. You know my offense. You know how much I believe in you. The guys here, I don't think run what they don't run the offense I need them to run. And I need a guy like you. Well, Coach, I want to go somewhere and we'll start. Hey, look, I understand that. You come here, you compete. I think you're the best guy in the room right now. You got to earn it, though. You got to prove it. You got to prove it to Coach Saban. You got to prove it to your teammates and all that. But I'm going to give you every opportunity to win that job because I know you, because I trust you, because we have a relationship. You've always been honest with me. Even when it was bringing in Sam Hartman, he was still honest with Tyler Buchner. Tyler knew exactly what they were going to do. And so it was, you're going to have to come here and compete, right? And if you do, if you play your game, I know what you can be. Because here's the thing. If Tyler Buchner and Ty Simpson both play to their full potential, Tyler Buchner's going to start. I know that some Notre Dame fans who have an obsession with hating Tyler Buchner don't think that. But if Tyler Buchner plays his best game, his best football, he's the best quarterback they have, in my opinion. Now, I think down the road, Dylan Lonergan has a chance to be their best quarterback, but he's a true freshman. But Tyler Buckner's more talented than Ty Simpson. He is. He's certainly a better quarterback than Jalen Milroe. Because if you think Tyler Buckner has issues throwing the football, maybe you haven't watched Jalen Milroe play. You know what I mean? So, I'll be shocked if he doesn't start there. But it has more to do with I'm just not the biggest Ty Simpson fan in the world.
Yeah.
More so than thinking Tyler Buckner is going to be this Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. That's really where it comes to for me. And the fact that Dylan Lonergan's not ready yet. And honestly, I'll say this. If Tyler struggles, don't be shocked if his eventual replacement is Dylan Lonergan and not Ty Simpson. That guy is got tremendous tools. If you haven't seen Dylan Lonergan play, Ryan, you've watched him play recently. Didn't you watch his film recently when we were talking about it?
Yep.
That guy's got a lot of talent. And apparently he's not going to play baseball anymore, which is surprising to me because he was a guy that people talk about maybe a first-round draft pick. That guy has as live of an arm as you're going to see. He's athletic.
Yeah.
Too. He can run around and scramble and throw. He's not like a Tyler Buckner runner. He's more of a scrambler. Like he's more Ian Book than he is Tyler Buckner. Would you say that's fair? Meaning he can run and like he'll when things break down in the pass game is when his legs become dangerous. Not so much like he's going to run a bunch of power O's and
pick up some first rounds when you need it.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, he's really good. He's really talented. But again, are you going to ask, is he a guy that's ready to start as a freshman? No. But if Buckner struggles and you've already lost a game or two, it's time to go to the future. And the future is not Ty Simpson, in my opinion. It's Dylan Lonergan, in my view. That's just my 2 cents. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that, Ryan. Thoughts on that?
We talked about it before. I just haven't seen Ty Simpson, so I have no opinion on Ty Simpson.
You never saw him in high school or anything like that?
Not really.
He's a coach's kid. He started getting hyped up when Bama went after him. He's got a nice arm, nice athlete. He's got some Ian Book to him, right? I mean, but he processes better than Ian Book. So I mean, he's not a bad quarterback, but people, 5-star, and I'm like, nah, he ain't that. He's a good player though.
Yeah.
I just think he doesn't have the ceiling to me. Like, are you gonna play him and stunt the development of Dylan Lonergan at that point in time? I don't know. Now, if Ty beats out Tyler Buckner, then he'll be the starting quarterback.
Sure.
My whole thing is, but if Buckner beats out Ty Simpson, he'll never become the starting quarterback unless Buckner gets hurt in like the first 2 games. That would be that's kind of my thing. But if if he doesn't, it's, you know what it is, Ryan? It's exactly what you said. The danger for Tyler Buckner is, right? Which was a good point, is if Tyler doesn't win the starting job right away, he's the oldest dude in the room.
It's going to get buried.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the thing for me with Ty Simpson is like, if he doesn't win the job now, this is his window. He's not going to win it in a year from now. If, like, let's say Tyler Buckner comes to Alabama and lights the world on, I don't think it's going to happen. Lights the world on fire, throws for 3,800 yards, rushes for 1,000 yards, and everybody thinks he's a first-round draft pick and he leaves for the NFL. I'm just making a point here, okay? I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah. Yep.
By that time, Dylan Lonergan will have caught up to Ty Simpson and probably be ready to pass him, in my opinion, right? So this is the window for Ty Simpson to become the starter. He's got to beat out Tyler Buckner. If he doesn't beat out Tyler Buckner, I don't think he becomes starting quarterback at Alabama, barring Buckner getting hurt like in September and Ty needs to step in. That's my thoughts. That's my 2 cents.
Fair.
I would be curious to have you watch this film at some point. Let me know what you think.
I'll go take a look.
Yeah. Anyway, that's going to do it for today's show. Ryan, why don't you go ahead and take us out of here, man?
Appreciate everybody, as always, for the great mailbag questions, of course. Thank you so much for joining us for the first section of this podcast. If you did not join us for where Notre Dame is championship caliber and where it needs to work moving forward, make sure to go back and listen to the first section of this podcast. But we thank you all again for joining us today. We will be back tomorrow, 1:00 Eastern time, me and Brian for the Friday free-for-all mailbag. Tonight, 6:00, IB Nation Sports Talk. Make sure to tune in. The best way to do that, hit that notification bell at the bottom of this video. If you're listening to us live on YouTube, 5-star reviews are always very much appreciated. Like, subscribe, all that great stuff. But we will catch you next time. From Ryan, that is Brian. I am Ryan. Thank you all for joining us today on the Irish Breakdown podcast.